The Alpha's Contracted Bride. A Werewolf Shifter Romance audiobook. Written by Maelis Hart. Chapter 1. The Contract in Snow. The wind did not whisper that morning. It screamed. Maelis Hart trudged through the waist-deep snow with a purpose stitched into every breath, though each inhale scraped like knives against her ribs. She clutched the medicine satchel tighter to her chest, the last of her barter scraps sewn into its seams, her father's silver ring, a coil of dried lavender, a bone charm once tied to her mother's braid. The border village hadn't just said no. They'd spat at her feet and slammed their doors. "There's no trade for Wolf's Pawn," the butcher's wife hissed, yanking her child away. "Take your cursed mark elsewhere." The scar on her back itched like fire in the cold. She didn't look back. Jude needed the fever root by nightfall. At 10 years old, his lungs were failing him faster than the snow could bury the trail home. Maelis crested the ridge, calves screaming. The world dropped away into silence as she stumbled upon the body in the snow. No, not a body. A man. He was sprawled in the frost like a broken blade, white-cloaked, blood soaking through his fur mantle, one arm twisted behind him. But what struck her most wasn't the wound. It was the silver embroidery glinting at his collar, barely visible beneath the snow. A flame pattern. Silverflame sigil. Her heart stuttered. "Sir," she whispered, crouching. "Are you?" The man's eyes opened, pale as the full moon, and locked onto hers with unnatural clarity. "You," he rasped, voice rough as gravel and prophecy. "You wear the mark." Before she could retreat, his gloved hand caught her wrist, and then Maelis knew nothing but falling snow and darkness. When she woke, the cold had changed. It wasn't biting. It was watching. Thick walls of carved stone rose around her, lit by iron sconces flickering with blue-tinged fire. Wolves, etched into every beam and arch. Her clothes had been stripped, replaced with woolen layers she didn't recognize. Her boots were gone. She was warm, but she didn't feel safe. The chamber door creaked open with ceremonial precision. A woman entered, tall, wrapped in black velvet, with hair like raven feathers and eyes like polished amber. Beautiful, in the way vipers are beautiful. "You're awake," the woman said, tone a shade too satisfied. Maelis sat upright, hand clutching the blanket. "Where am I?" Silverflame hold. No, that was impossible. No one human crossed into Silverflame and returned. It was sacred land. Cursed land. The woman took 3 measured steps forward. "I am Vale. Sister to the Alpha. You were brought here under the sign." "What sign?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "The winter howl. The mark on your back. You bear it." Maelis froze. It wasn't real. Just an old burn scar. I want to leave." "You will not." Kasira's voice was silk and steel. "The Alpha has summoned you." Maelis was marched, half-dazed, half-defiant, through a fortress of stone and shadow, its walls ancient and echoing. The Silverflame hold was less castle, more monument. Every hallway seemed built to dwarf the mortals inside it. When they entered the great chamber, the world narrowed to one presence. He stood beside the moonfire sigil, his back to her, deep brown hair curling just above his collar, broad shoulders carved into silhouette by the cold light. Power radiated from him, not blinding, but oppressive in its stillness. Like the heart of a storm. Darian Vale turned. Storm-gray eyes met hers. And the world paused. Not with shock. Not with romance. With something older. Wilder. Recognition. But not desire. Not yet. "Maelis Hart," he said, voice low and even, like a sword being unsheathed. "You've been selected to enter a binding contract under Pact Law 71.2, Lunar Preservation Clause." "I didn't agree to any." "You will," Kasira interjected, "if you want your brother to live." Maelis turned to her. "What?" "The boy. Jude Hart. He carries the ash fever. Without continued care from our apothecary, he won't last the week." "You're threatening a child?" "We're offering sanctuary." Darian's voice cut across hers like flint on stone. "But it is conditional. A contract. 2 years. Mated by law, not by bond. You will hold the role of territorial consort in name only. After 2 years, the bond is dissolved. Her mouth was dry. And if I refuse? Kasira smiled. Then the snow takes him. They gave her the night to decide. She didn't sleep. Jude was everything. He was the only thing. At dawn, they took her to the moonfire altar, high on the terrace beyond the keep, where the wind howled like something alive. Snow cut sideways through the air, stinging her cheeks as she stepped forward. The Alpha waited alone at the stone slab, a scroll open between them. The moment her hand brushed the parchment, a single flake of snow landed on the ink. It hissed. She pressed her thumb to the blood seal. The sky was silent. And then, far above them, a howl broke through the stillness, long, mournful, echoing against the white bone peaks. Darian Vale's head turned sharply. His eyes widened a fraction. She looked up at him, breathless. In that heartbeat, neither of them moved. But something inside the air cracked. Not love. Not yet. But something was waiting. Something, waking. Chapter 2, Ice Between Us. Silverflame hold rose like a fortress carved from winter's bones, its towers sheathed in frost, its iron gates echoing with the low hum of warding runes. Maelis Hart stood beneath the stone archway, her breath misting before her, clutching her satchel to her chest like it could shield her from the judging stares that poured down from the battlements. The courtyard was lined with watchful eyes. Wolves in human skin, soldiers in hardened leathers, their stances lazy but alert, their gazes tinged with disdain. Kasira Vale led the procession, her cloak trailing like ink against snow. "You'll reside in the south wing," she said crisply, not bothering to glance back. "The servants' tier. You'll find it adequate." Maelis said nothing. She didn't rise to bait. Kasira slowed, heels clicking sharply on the stone floor as they turned into a narrow hall dimly lit by flickering sconces. "We don't often host humans here," Kasira said over her shoulder, voice dipped in velvet and venom. "Most of them die long before they cross our gates." "But then, you're not most humans, are you?" Maelis met her gaze. "I'm not here to impress you." Kasira smiled. Thin. Sharp. "No. But you'll be watched. Closely." Later that afternoon, the clamor of the training yard reached her room. Maelis wandered toward it, driven less by curiosity than the need to stretch her legs, to breathe without walls pressing in. What she found was a theater of snarling energy, young men and women sparring with blunted blades, shifting half-formed beneath their skins, bones snapping mid-duel as claws retracted and reappeared. She stayed at the edge, silent. Until they noticed her. "That's her," someone muttered. "The Alpha's contract whore." Laughter rippled. "Should have sent her to the kennels." Maelis turned, fists clenched, ready to walk away, when a figure stepped into view, placing himself between her and the mocking crowd. "That's enough," Elin Corvin said. The beta was taller than most, not as broad as Darian, but there was a steadiness in him, a mountain stillness Maelis hadn't realized she'd been craving. His green eyes were calm, his tone mild, but the mocking died like frost beneath sunlight. "Apologies, Lady Maelis," he added gently. "Don't call me that," she murmured. "I'm no one's lady." He nodded, but there was something in his gaze, quiet, assessing kind. Before more could be said, a door slammed at the top of the stairs. And Darian Vale descended. He moved like shadow incarnate, each step echoing authority. The soldiers stiffened. The air grew taut. He looked directly at Maelis and said nothing. Just past her. As if she were smoke. That evening, the summons came. A silver-robed page knocked once, bowed, and led her through vaulted corridors lined with relics and grim-faced portraits. The doors to the council chamber opened with a groan that felt ancient, like something inside was waking. Darian stood at the long table, papers spread before him. "You're late," he said, though she wasn't. Maelis stepped forward, refusing to flinch. "You summoned me." He didn't smile. Didn't blink. "This is the territory mate registry," he said, sliding a parchment toward her. "A formality. It ensures your legal presence within the hold. Without it, any soldier could challenge your right to breathe here." Her hand hovered over the quill. "What if I refuse to sign?" Then the elders will see it as breach of the contract. You will be returned to the wilds. And Jude? He remains. At their mercy. Silence. She reached for the quill. Darian moved to hand it to her. Their fingers touched. Just the brush of skin, but it struck like a lightning bolt. A jolt up the arm, searing, wild, wrong. Maelis gasped. Her eyes snapped up to his. And for the first time, Darian faltered. His expression didn't change, but his breath hitched. Just once. A fraction of a second. Then he released the quill. Sign it, he said, voice low and cold. Don't mistake biology for bond. She signed. And in the silence that followed, the air still crackled. The space between them wasn't empty. It was charged. And neither of them knew yet what it meant. Chapter 3: The Silverfire Trial. They summoned her before dawn, when the moon still clung stubbornly to the sky like a pale eye refusing to blink. Millie stood at the edge of the ceremonial courtyard, her breath visible in the bitter air, her palms clammy despite the cold. Silverflame's most ancient ritual grounds sprawled before her, stone-carved and snow-swept, flanked by towering wolf statues whose mouths breathed quiet mist into the frozen air. At the center, the wall of silverfire crackled, an ethereal blaze that shimmered between two obsidian pillars, its flames dancing a ghostly blue. She had never seen anything like it. The fire didn't move like fire. It twisted like memory, like breath, like soul. A test, they called it. A tradition older than the mountain itself. If she were to remain within the hold, if she were to be considered Darian's contract mate, even for appearances, she had to prove her spirit purity. No human had ever passed through the silverfire without burning. No one expected her to. Not really. She felt it in the way the elders watched her, high upon their cold thrones of blackwood and ice-polished stone. Their eyes were old and hard and unreadable. She felt it in the whispers around her. And most of all, she felt it in the gaze of Vale, standing on the temple steps, arms elegantly folded beneath her velvet cloak. Her lips curled in the slightest suggestion of amusement. Kasaira's eyes said it clearly. You will fail. And, perhaps, burn. Before the ritual began, two handmaidens approached her in silence. They offered no names, only gestures. One held a shallow bowl of clear water. The other extended a folded cloth. Cleanse yourself, one murmured. Maelis dipped her hands into the icy basin, scrubbing with shaking fingers. Her palms were raw from days of labor and frost. But as she dried them, something stuck. Grit. She looked down. Dark flecks clung beneath her nails. Something sticky. Smelling faintly of ash. Why is there soot? She whispered aloud. The handmaidens didn't answer. Kasaira's eyes glittered. It hit her then. The sudden truth of it. She's tainted the water. Maelis's heart pounded. Her hands weren't clean. If the silverfire tested purity, if soot marked her skin, it could reject her. Harm her. Kill her. She looked toward Darian Vale. He stood at the far end of the courtyard, arms crossed, face a mask of granite. His storm-gray eyes met hers, cool and impenetrable. He didn't move. Didn't intervene. He wouldn't save her. He wanted to see what she would do. They all did. A drumbeat sounded, one single, echoing strike. The ritual had begun. Millie stepped forward. Each footfall sounded louder than the last, crunching over frost-bitten stone. Her breath came shallow. The fire twisted before her, tall and beckoning. She had no magic. No wolf blood. No divine lineage. Just a heart pounding like thunder and the stubbornness of a girl who'd spent too long being less than seen. She stepped into the flame. And screamed. It was not the scream of agony. Not at first. It was instinct, primal and sharp, a reaction to heat unlike anything she had ever felt, cold and hot at once, as if it seared and froze her nerves in tandem. Her fingers burned. Her palms flared in sudden white-hot pain where the soot had lodged. But she didn't stop. She bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted copper. The fire surged up around her. Blue at first. Then violet. Then white. Gasps rang through the courtyard. The flames changed. Not just in color. In shape. They coiled, arched, then twisted into the form of a massive wolf head, luminous and spectral, with eyes like moons. It circled her, watched her. The air vibrated. Maelis's legs buckled, but she didn't fall. Somewhere far off, one of the elders rose to their feet. Moonfire, a voice whispered in awe. It recognizes her. And still, Darian Vale said nothing. He hadn't moved. Not once. When Maelis finally stumbled out the other side of the flame wall, her arms trembled. Her palms were blistered. Smoke curled from her sleeves. But she was upright. She had crossed. A single hush fell over the gathering. Then came the verdict. The human is marked, one elder intoned. Not by deceit. Not by ambition. But by divine variance. She is past. Kasira turned away too quickly. Maelis caught the flicker in her jaw, a tick of rage. A clenched smile. But it was Darian she looked to last. Still unmoved. Still watching. Only now his eyes were narrowed. Not with scorn, but calculation. And for a single, flickering second, wonder. That night, as Maelis sat alone in her stone-cold quarters, binding her burned hands with scraps of cloth, she heard the low howl of a wolf rise beyond the window. It wasn't close. But it wasn't distant either. It was low, lonely, and oddly familiar. As if something in her marrow heard it and shivered in reply. Chapter 4, Beneath the Frost. The frost came early that night. Millie sat on the edge of her narrow cot, the last embers in the hearth crumbling into gray hush. Her palms, raw and bandaged, itched beneath the cloth, but she didn't move. She couldn't. The weight of what had passed that day, the firewall, the verdict, the way Darian had looked at her, settled into her spine like snow too heavy to shake. She didn't cry. Not when the elders marked her. Not when Kasira turned her back. Not even when the moon's light spilled through the tower window and stirred something deep, something waiting. Only when the silence became unbearable did she whisper into the dark, "What did I wake up in?" No answer came. Only the slow breath of the wind and a sound. Soft. Barely there. A shift of weight on stone. She stood. Slowly. Crossed the chamber and cracked the door. The corridor was empty. But not silent. Far off, through the high arches, the mountain keep moaned. It wasn't wind, it was too steady. Too deliberate. Like the echo of a name that had yet to be spoken. She found Jude 2 days later on the balcony at dawn, his face pale with sleeplessness. "You weren't at breakfast," she said, crouching beside him. He didn't answer. Only watched the sky, hands clasped in his lap. Eyes glassy. "Jude." "I heard her again," he murmured. "The one-eyed woman. She called me by the name I don't remember." Maelis felt her heart catch. "You were dreaming?" No. She was inside the dream. But she wasn't of it. His hands began to move. At first she thought he was cold, but no, they drew. On the stone with the soot from the fireplace. A half circle. Twin lines. A shape. A sigil. Maelis stared. It was Darian's crest. That night, Eland found her pacing in the lower corridor, face drawn tight. "He's speaking in tongues," she told him. At night? In his sleep. On the balcony. Eland didn't question. He just nodded. And said, "Come. There's something you need to see." The Woolbone Glade was unlike any place Maelis had ever seen. Half-forgotten stone monoliths jutted from the earth like fangs. Snow did not gather here. Wind did not howl. It was too quiet and too still, as if time itself paused at the tree line. "This is the Wolfbone Cairn," Eland said. "Old as the mountain. Older than even the Moonfire altar. Before the pacts, before the laws, this was where oaths were made and broken." He led her to the tallest stone, where deep etchings had long since faded. "Some say the gods cursed us here. Others say we cursed ourselves. And which do you believe?" Eland's joy tightened. "I believe there's truth we're not meant to understand." Then, more gently, "But your brother, he may be waking up part of it." That night, Maelis dreamed of snow and of fire beneath it. She stood in a forest made of bones, branches like ribs, moonlight filtering through a canopy of nothing. A woman waited in the clearing. Hooded. Blind in one eye. Her voice was smoke and winter. "White bone moonmark," she said. "Daughter of divergence. The fire will not kill you. It will name you." And when Maelis looked down, her own hands were silver, burning. But she did not hurt. She woke gasping, and found Jude, already awake, whispering at the window again. But this time, the moon whispered back. Chapter 5: Howls in the Dark. The storm hadn't come yet, but the wind whispered of its approach. Maelis woke to silence and knew immediately something was wrong. The fire in the hearth had died to a cold glow, and frost had crept across the window panes like skeletal fingers. But that wasn't what stirred her. It was the absence. The unbearable stillness where soft breaths should have been. "Jude!" Her whisper broke against the chill. She sat up, heart stammering. The cot beside hers was empty. Sheets still warm. No footprints in the ash-dusted stone, no sound in the hall. Just moonlight, pale and vast, painting the floor like a silver warning. Panic bloomed like frostbite in her chest. She didn't call out, there was no point. The keep was too vast, its halls too hollow. She grabbed her cloak, the one still damp from the wash basin, and slipped into the corridor barefoot. "Jude," she breathed again, pleading this time. No answer. Only a hush so deep it felt like the stones themselves were listening. The path took her down through servants' quarters and up the rear stairwell, where the frost hadn't yet been scraped from the banisters. Maelis's breath fogged in front of her as she reached the upper balconies, ones forbidden to servants, even more so to her. That was when she saw him. Jude stood barefoot on the outer terrace. Shirtless. Skin kissed by cold and moon. His silver-flecked eyes were wide, turned skyward, and his lips moved in language she did not know. "Jude," she called, rushing forward. But her feet halted mid-stride. Because what he was saying wasn't human. It wasn't even spoken. It felt ancient. Inborn. As if the moon was whispering back. Her little brother swayed. Then, slowly, with the grace of something guided, he bent and traced a shape in the frost pooling along the balcony's edge. A circle. A mark. No, a crust. The same sharp curve and twin lines she had seen before. Etched above the high seat of Silverflame hold. Darian's family sigil. Her blood went ice cold. "Jude," she said again, gentler now. "Come back to me." His head turned. But it wasn't a child's gaze that met hers, it was something stranger, older. And then, he collapsed. Eland Corvin found them moments later, alerted by one of the inner guards who'd caught sight of Maelis climbing the terrace steps. He lifted Jude easily, wrapping the boy in a cloak and shielding him from the wind. Maelis followed behind, dazed, arms wrapped around herself. Once they reached the inner hall, Eland looked to her. His green eyes were soft, but firm. "You should have woken me. I couldn't risk the guards stopping me. They already think I'm cursed," she whispered. Eland didn't contradict her. Instead, he led her out through the side hall and down into the lower eastern wing, a part of the keep where few ventured after nightfall. To the Wolfbone Grove. Maelis had never been there before. It wasn't a grove in the traditional sense. Not trees, but towering stones, smoothed by time and snow. Dozens of them, pale as ash, each etched with symbols and names, some worn to nothing, others still fresh. They rose from the frozen ground like bones from a burial site, encircling a hollow where the wind rarely stirred. "This is where we bury our dead," Eland said quietly, setting Jude's sleeping form against a pillar. "And where we remember the old gods." "You mean the ones your kind claim were banished?" He nodded once. "Banished or buried. Some say both. Why bring me here?" Eland turned toward her, jaw tight. "Because you need to understand this place, this curse on our bonds, our bloodlines, it didn't begin with wolves. It began with fire. Moonfire. And before that, with something far more ancient. Something that sleeps in your brother." Maelis stared at him. "You believe me?" "I do," he said softly. "I always have." Her throat thickened. "Then why serve Darian? Why stay silent?" Eland's gaze dropped to the frost. "Because silence is the only loyalty I have left. And breaking it would cost more than I can afford." A pause. Then he looked at her again. "But you, Maelis, you weren't born here. You weren't shaped by our rules. And you don't owe the moon anything. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because memory stirred in her. A dream. A forgotten dream from childhood of a woman with one eye and a voice like torn velvet. You carry the white bone moon mark, the crone had said. You will bleed fire. And call the dead to howl. Maelis pressed her hands to her temples. Maelis? Eland reached out, but she flinched back. I need to get Jude to bed, she whispered. And then she fled. The wind howled that night. It rattled the shutters. And when Maelis awoke again, it was to nothing. Again. Jude's bed was empty. Again. But this time, his window was open. And the air was filled with snow. She didn't hesitate. Boots still unlaced, she ran. Out into the courtyard, across the outer ring, and through the back gate where frost coiled over the iron hinges. The moon-shroud forest awaited her, a sea of black trees and silver fog, where no light lingered and no voice echoed back. Jude, she screamed. The forest swallowed the sound. Snowflakes kissed her skin like ice pin needles. Her breath wheezed in her chest. Branches clawed at her cheeks. The world narrowed to the crunch of her feet and the fire of fear in her throat. Then a shadow moved. Jude, she called again. A cry. Faint. She followed it. Too fast. Too blindly. Until. Crack. The ice beneath her gave way. The lake was not deep, but it was cold. The kind of cold that didn't just numb, it seized. Maelis plunged into blackness, her breath punched from her lungs. Her arms thrashed, legs kicking upward. But the ice was slick. Broken. There was no hold. Water filled her ears. Her mouth. She screamed, but it came out as a bubble. Then white. Something crashed through the trees. A howl, feral and ancient, tore through the night. And then. Teeth. Fur. The lake erupted. And he was there. Darian Vale. In wolf form. Twice the size of any beast she had seen. Deep brown fur streaked with silver at the neck, storm eyes gleaming with something raw rage. Fear. Hunger. He lunged into the water, teeth gripping her coat, dragging her up. The moment she breached the surface, her hand touched his shoulder, and the world lit. Not with light, but with sound. A resonance. A call. Their magic sang. His entire body stiffened. Then rippled. His bones cracked. His form twitched, as if it couldn't decide what it was. Half wolf. Half man. His eyes turned silver. Flames licked along his spine, silver fire, bright and alive. He almost lost control. Almost became something legend whispered of but never named. And then, he shoved her against his chest, for bristling, and ran. When they reached the gates, he shifted. Naked and heaving, skin steaming in the snow, eyes no longer cold, but wild. He dropped her on the stone just outside the gate, then staggered back. Maelis coughed. Her lips were blue. Her fingers trembled. She tried to speak. He didn't let her. He leaned in, inches from her face. His voice, hoarse, ragged, full of ache, cracked in the dark. Don't call me again. Then he turned. And vanished into the trees. But long after he left, as she lay there half-conscious beneath the rising moon, she looked at the lake's frozen surface, now refrozen into a perfect mirror. There, in the glow of silver and shadow, were two overlapping silhouettes. His and hers. Not separate. Entwined. And as her vision faded, her lips parted with a whisper. You're not meant to be Alpha. And far away, in the depths of the forest, a wolf ran faster than thought and whispered into the wind. But you are my moon. Chapter 6, The Broken Oath. Snow fell in slow, solemn drifts over Silverflame hold, burying the ancient banners that hung from its carved eaves in white silence. But the silence would not last. For this was the day of the Moon Dial Inquisition. Maelis stood near the edge of the upper gallery, hidden behind a pillar veiled in frost, watching the stone circle below fill with figures clad in heavy cloaks and ceremonial bone fastenings. She'd only heard whispers of this place, the Moon Dial courtyard, where oaths were tested and truths, no matter how buried, were forced to the surface. And at its center stood Darian Vale. The Alpha's coat was jet black today, the collar lined with silver white wolf fur. A circlet of obsidian adorned his brow, a mark of rank worn only during council summoning. He looked like a king. But his eyes, storm gray, remote, too still, were the eyes of a man walking to war with his own shadow. "Don't move," a voice said beside her. Maelis flinched, turning sharply. Kasira Vale stood at her shoulder, arms crossed, lips curved in something that might have been a smile, if it weren't so cold. "You're not permitted here," she added. Golden eyes narrowed. "I'm not leaving," Maelis replied, voice low but steady. "He brought me here." Kasira's eyes flicked toward her brother below. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" The elder's horn was sounded. Low, bone-deep, it trembled through the courtyard like a buried roar awakening. Elder Maeve emerged from the east gate, her form hunched but not frail, draped in ceremonial furs that shimmered like cracked ice. Her presence silenced even the crows. Maelis leaned forward. That was her, the legendary archivist, the mind behind the ancient soul mark writs. Some said her blood ran older than the mountain roots. Others whispered she had once been Luna before abdicating for the power of knowledge. Elder Maeve raised a twisted staff of carved bone, its top crowned with a shard of moonstone. "Bring forth the Alpha," she said. Darian stepped forward. The wind lifted his dark hair, and for a breathless second, Maelis could almost see the boy he once was, the boy burdened too soon with grief and power. Elder Maeve's voice rang clear. "You are summoned under the law of bloodline protection to answer for the events of last moon's awakening. A human girl touched the moon flame, survived the Alpha's resonance, and did not fall. This is without precedent." The crowd stirred. Someone whispered the word abomination. Maelis's jaw tensed. Elder Maeve turned her sharp gaze toward Darian. "You have not disclosed a breach in the Soulmark law, nor have you reported the flare of the flame bond. Explain." Darian's voice was quiet, too quiet, but firm. "There was no breach. The resonance was uncontrolled. An accident. The girl is not marked." Maeve's brows lifted. "And yet, your body reacted. The moonfire within you responded. Did you not nearly manifest the Silverflame form?" Gasps echoed across the circle. Maelis's breath caught. Silverflame form. A transformation so rare it was said to kill most who attempted it, part flame, part spirit, born only when an alpha soul was fully aligned with their mate. Darian didn't answer. Maeve struck her staff against the stone. "Answer, Vale." His fists curled at his sides. His jaw clenched. Then, "Yes." The word was a blade. "Yes, I almost transformed. But I held it back. The girl, Maelis Hart, was not the cause. The curse is older than her. You know it." Maeve's eyes narrowed. "Then let us speak plainly. Is it true that the former Luna, your mother, died not from illness, but from the blood-severing curse?" Silence. The snow stopped falling. The air tightened like a noose. Darian's face shifted, just slightly. His storm-gray eyes flicked toward the horizon. And then, quietly, as if ripping the truth from his ribs, he said, "Yes." The courtyard erupted in whispers. Maelis could barely breathe. Maeve leaned in like a wolf scenting blood. "And did the same curse not mark your father's bond into madness?" "Yes." Kasira's hands gripped the balcony edge, knuckles white. Maeve's voice became a whip. "Then why, Alpha, did you not reveal this to the council before now? Why shield the truth from your people?" Darian's voice shook, just a tremor, but it was the first Maelis had ever heard. "Because I had to protect what was left." A pause. Then, softer, "Because if they knew the truth, that the soul bond itself is flawed, poisoned, they'd lose faith in everything. In the law. In me." His eyes burned silver then. Just for a moment. Wolf silver. Kasira inhaled sharply. Maelis saw it too. The crack in the mask. The thing behind the control. The creature barely leashed. He wasn't just an alpha. He was a man breaking. And suddenly, she saw him not as the cold figure who dragged her from a lake, but as a boy who had watched his mother die, who had inherited a curse he couldn't name, and who stood now alone, before his own ruin. "He's more alone than I am," she thought. Later, when the courtyard had emptied and the snow resumed its silent fall, Maelis found herself in the northern hall, arms wrapped tight around herself, replaying the moment over and over. The way Darian's eyes had flickered. The way his voice had cracked. The way no one had stood beside him. Not even Kasira. Why are you still here? Maelis turned. Kasira stepped from the shadows, still regal in her fur-lined cloak, but her expression was raw. Not angry. Not haughty. Wounded. He lied for you, Kasira said. Do you know what that means? Maelis didn't answer. Kasira walked closer. The last time someone tried to suppress the flame bond, they lost control and burned down half of Stonehall Vale. Darian is stronger than them. But not invincible. I didn't ask him to protect me, Maelis whispered. Kasira's lips curled. You think that matters? He felt you. The bond knows. And now he's tearing himself apart, trying not to act on it. Maelis's heart pounded. You're wrong, she said. Kasira's voice softened. Am I? She stepped even closer. Do you know what happened to the girl who triggered my father's bond before Luna Myria? The one he rejected for political alliance. Maelis stared. She bled out on the moonfire altar. Alone. A beat of silence. Then Kasira's voice dropped, barely audible. My brother won't let that happen again. Maelis swallowed. You think I'm going to kill him? Kasira shook her head. No. I think you're going to break him. And then she walked away, leaving Maelis in the dark. Alone. Chapter 7. Flames That Listen. The library tower of Silverflame hold rose like a broken fawn against the morning sky, ancient, spiraled, and charred at the top where lightning had struck it generations ago. Snow clung to its stone ribs, and icicles hung like teeth above its heavy bronze doors. Maelis had never dared enter it. Until now. She tightened her grip on Jude's small hand as they crossed the threshold. The air inside was dry with dust and parchment, but alive, almost vibrating. Tall shelves loomed in labyrinthine rings around a central spiral staircase, their bindings worn and glowing faintly beneath cold torchlight. This place smells like old wolves, Jude murmured, scrunching his nose. Books are old wolves, Maelis whispered back. They remember everything. The boy's fingers trembled in hers. He hadn't slept well since the Inquisition. Darian hadn't spoken to them since. But worse, something in Jude had begun. Shifting. Dreams laced with fire. Whispers no one else could hear. And last night, he had woken screaming in a tongue Maelis didn't recognize. She needed answers. They climbed carefully, past floor after floor of glyph-bound tomes and iron-shuttered scroll cages. Somewhere high above, the flame lanterns hummed in rhythm with Jude's heartbeat. At the fourth tier, a voice greeted them. You shouldn't be here alone. Maelis turned. Eland Corvin leaned against the railing, his cloak damp from melted snow, his green eyes steady. Her heart kicked. He always looked as though he'd stepped straight from the storybooks her mother used to read, tall, weather-worn, too noble for the cold world he served. I wasn't alone, she said. I had Jude. Eland's gaze dropped to the boy, then lifted again. Still dangerous. The old books here have teeth. I thought the beta of Silverflame only feared politics, she quipped, brushing past him toward a table stacked with scroll maps. I fear a great many things, Maelis, he replied softly. Losing what matters most. That ranks near the top. She froze, his words brushing against her like a touch that never landed. What are you looking for? He asked. She hesitated. Signs. Marks of the old gods. Anything that speaks of spirits that burn instead of bind. Eland didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped beside her and pulled down a black spine tome with a wolf claw etched into the leather. This might help. She blinked. You just knew where it was? He smiled faintly. You think I don't do my own hunting? Their eyes met. Something cracked open between them, quiet, like the slow thaw of ice. Jude, meanwhile, had wandered to a corner alcove where a ring of old prayer stones surrounded a dormant flame pedestal. His fingers traced symbols etched into the metal, the ancient language of the moonfire tongue. Then, unprompted, he dropped to his knees and began to draw. Chalk appeared in his hand from a hidden pocket. His strokes were swift, elegant. Circles within circles. Arrows that mirrored the phases of the moon. A wolf's mouth devouring the sun. The air shifted. Maelis looked up sharply as a low hum filled the library tower. Papers lifted. Firelight flickered. "Jude," she called. But he didn't stop. His hand moved like it was being guided. Suddenly, the flame pedestal in the center sparked. A tongue of silver-white fire rose from its core, tall and lean like a serpent waking, dancing toward Jude's outstretched fingers. "No!" Maelis moved to grab him. Eland lunged faster, pulling her back just as the flame erupted in a shockwave of heatless light. The glyphs Jude had drawn shimmered gold. The fire sang. Not aloud, not to them, but to something ancient that lived within the stone bones of the tower. The wolves of Silverflame had called it flame listening, a forbidden gift lost to time. The doors slammed open. Elder Maeve entered, flanked by 2 guards in boneplate armor. Her face was stone. Her eyes locked on the pedestal. Then on Jude. "Seize the boy." Maelis shoved herself in front of her brother. "No." Maeve lifted her staff. "He is touched. Marked by something we buried centuries ago. A child should not wake the flame." "He didn't wake it, it woke to him." Maelis shouted, voice breaking. Eland stepped between them, his voice calm. There was no danger. Maeve's gaze narrowed. "You of all wolves should not be blind to what sings in fire, Corvin." Maelis felt Jude trembling behind her. "You can't take him," she said, softer now, shaking. Maeve raised a single finger. "He is a child of the flame call. That bloodline was purged for a reason. His existence is heresy. You don't even know what he is." Maelis screamed. "You're just afraid." Maeve stepped forward, hand glowing with control sigils. "Fear is the wisdom of the old. And you, girl, have none." But before her spell struck, Eland moved. Not a step, but a full-bodied shift, arms swept in front of Maelis, stance lowered, his voice a growl. "If she is a crime," he snarled, "then you should have burned a long time ago, Maeve." The tower froze. Even the fire went still. Maeve's eyes widened. "You would break the Elder's code for her?" Eland didn't flinch. "I would break everything before I let you lay a hand on her." Maelis felt the world tilt. His words cut through her like sunlight through fog. Maeve lowered her hand. "Then, icily, so be it. The boy will be confined for observation. But know this, Corvin, your loyalty now bleeds." She turned, robes flaring behind her, and the guards followed. The silence left behind felt deafening. Later, as the flames settled and the tower returned to shadow, Maelis sat beside Jude on the floor, holding his shaking body against hers. Eland crouched beside them. "You didn't have to do that," Maelis whispered. "I did." "Why?" His voice was quiet. "Because you've walked too long in this place thinking no one would stand for you." She didn't reply. Couldn't. But for the first time since arriving in Silverflame Hold, Maelis didn't feel like prey. She felt like fire. Chapter 8: Wolf and Warlock. Snow fell like ash along the eastern cliffs of Silverflame, soft but relentless, coating every stone, every ruin, every secret in its suffocating hush. Cassira Vale stood beneath the leaning arch of the old watchtower, her cloak of onyx velvet fluttering against the pale wind. The world around her was quiet, suspended, as if waiting for her to speak something unforgivable into it. And she might have, if not for the man who stepped from the shadows behind her. "Cold morning for a lady of fire," he said, voice a honeyed lilt with a bite beneath. Cassira turned, slowly, deliberately. She had known someone was following her, but not who. What she found was not a common spy or wandering soldier. The man was young, golden-haired, with a face carved too perfectly to be harmless. A scar ran down one cheek, delicate as a whisper, lending him an air of noble ruin. His eyes were fox-like, amber and clever, always half-smiling. "You're not from Silverflame," Cassira said coolly. "And you're not as blind as your brother hopes." She tilted her chin. "You speak boldly for a trespasser." "I speak freely for a friend," he said, stepping forward. "Or an ally, if you'd prefer." "I don't prefer anything yet." He gave her a charming bow, low and mocking. "Cale Thorne. Historian. Wanderer. Outcast." She didn't miss the flicker in his gaze when he said the last word, as if it had once been branded into him and never healed. "And what do you want, Cale Thorne?" He lifted his head, his smile deepening. "To offer you the truth. And the crown your brother will never let you wear." They walked through the snow-laced ruins, crumbling remnants of a border fortress forgotten by Silverflame's current regime. The stones murmured of betrayal and frostbitten battles. Kale seemed utterly at home here. "You think I want a crown?" Kasaira asked after a silence that burned. "I think you want more than embroidery and side benches," during the Elder Council's whispers. "I've earned my place." "Yes," he said softly. "And Darian still keeps you in the corner like a treasured painting. Framed. Unchanging." Kasaira's jaw tightened. "You burn for a throne, Kasaira. You've simply been told to call it obedience." She stopped, facing him. "And what throne are you offering?" Kale's smile sharpened. "Not one of carved stone. One born of legacy. Bloodline. Fire." She narrowed her eyes. "You speak like a priest." He leaned closer. "No. Priests preach myths. I speak of what is. What was stolen." Kasaira didn't move, but her breath hitched. "The curse," Kale continued, voice now a low rhythm, "was never a punishment from the gods. It was crafted. Forged in secrecy. Your dear brother has lied." Her heart pounded. "Lied about what?" "That the soul mark was a divine decree. That the madness, the ruin, it comes from broken bonds." Kale stepped closer, his voice a whisper. "But what if I told you it comes from hoarded power? That the bloodline of Silverflame was not cursed but corrupted, from within?" Kasaira's stomach turned cold. "You're lying." He didn't blink. "Am I? Or has Darian hidden the truth for so long, you've forgotten how to doubt him?" "I would never betray. Not even for a world where you reign? Where no man decides which sister deserves to rise, and which one is kept for ceremony." Her mouth opened. Closed. And Kale's final blow landed softly, like silk against skin. "You were never meant to be Luna, Kasaira." She swallowed. "Then what was I meant to be?" His amber eyes gleamed like candlelight on a blade. "Queen." Beneath the castle, in the iron-barred shadows of the keep, Jude Hart traced his fingers along the frost-bitten walls of his cell. The stone pulsed faintly beneath his touch. It listened. Just like the fire had. He curled into himself. Maelis hadn't come yet. They'd promised she could visit. They'd promised. He wanted to be brave. He did. But the voice in his dreams was growing louder. "Follow the howl," it said. "Follow the flame." He jolted upright when the lock clicked. A man stepped in, hood drawn, the torchlight catching on a scarred cheek and the corner of a smirk. "Hello, little spark," Kale whispered. Jude blinked. "You're not a guard." "No," Kale said, crouching beside him. "I'm much more fun than that." He held out his hand. And somehow Jude took it. They slipped like shadows through the underhalls, the corridors old and twisted. Jude clung to Kale's cloak, heart racing. "Where are we going?" "To the beginning," Kale said. "To the place your sister fears most and needs most." Jude hesitated. "She told me not to leave." "And sometimes," Kale said, eyes gleaming, "you must break the rule to break the chain." They reached a sealed archway. Beyond it stretched the labyrinth, the moonbone tunnels, once used for rites long since forbidden. Beneath those catacombs lay the wolf altar, a relic older than the Silverflame pact itself, a place of raw spirit, of blood and resonance. Kale pressed a pendant to the stone and murmured a word lost to time. The gate groaned open. "Go on," he told Jude gently. "The path is only yours." The boy hesitated, then stepped forward, small hand reaching into the dark. As Jude vanished into the maze, Kale exhaled and turned away. Behind him, in the flickering light of the torch he'd left behind, the wall was etched with an ancient mark, a wolf devouring a moon. Kasaira watched from the cliff as Kale returned, his cloak stirring around his legs like a storm cloud. "He's inside," she asked. Kale nodded. "The altar will call to him. And when Maelis follows, the bond will ignite." She didn't ask how he knew. "Why are you doing this?" she said. He turned to her, eyes glittering. "Because Silverflame needs to burn before it can rise. And because your brother," his voice curled like smoke, "was never meant to lead." "And Maelis?" Kale's smile was almost kind. "She was meant to choose." Kasaira glanced toward the distant spires of the moonfire altar, where the sky was beginning to ripple with strange light. She didn't yet realize she had already chosen. Chapter 9. The moon cracks open. The wind screamed through the white bone peaks, slicing down the flanks of Silverflame like 1,000 invisible blades. But Maelis Hart barely felt the cold anymore. She was already inside it. Her boots slapped against the ancient stone as she tore down the lower corridor of the keep, past the cold cell doors and flickering torch sconces, her breath ragged. The path to the moonbone tunnels had long been sealed, forgotten, some whispered, but Maelis had followed the strange pull in her chest, the echo that vibrated just beneath her ribs. Jude was down here. She knew it the way a thread knows the needle, inevitably drawn. At the last curve of the corridor, she stopped before a crumbled arch, where frost bloomed along the stones in the shape of fangs. Her fingers trembled as she pressed against the seal. Nothing. Then she whispered his name. Not Jude. The other one. The name he had murmured in his sleep like a prayer, Nocturus. The stones breathed open. A gasp of air rushed past her, damp and alive with age. The maze yawned before her in darkness. Maelis stepped into it. Inside, the light changed. It wasn't darkness, it was something older than darkness. The walls were carved with runes no one had spoken in centuries, sigils that glowed faintly as she passed. Her footsteps echoed like heartbeats, hers or something else's. Jude. Her voice cracked against the stillness. She didn't expect an answer. But it came. Not from him. From beneath. A whisper, layered in tongues not her own, curling through the stone. You should not be here. She gritted her teeth and kept walking. She found him at the center. Jude knelt in the middle of a wide stone chamber, pale light spilling from a fractured altar of wolf bone. The walls rose high and circular, carved with spiraling glyphs. But it was the monolith in the center that drew her. It pulsed. A smooth slab of moonstone, carved with sharp spiraling script, the old tongue. The kind no one taught anymore. The kind that spoke to blood instead of thought. Jude was tracing the words with his fingertip, his mouth moving silently. Jude. Maelis rushed forward, grabbing his shoulders. We have to go. The altar flared. A shockwave rippled through the stone floor. Maelis stumbled, clutching Jude to her chest. The glow seared her palms, entered them. The silver sigils carved into the slab shimmered, and something inside her snapped open. Like a cage. Her body lifted from the floor. She was no longer in the altar room. She was somewhere else. Floating. Inside memory or myth or spirit. A vision. The moon hung low above an ocean of snow. Wolves howled, 1,000 voices twining into one. And at the center, 2 figures, hands clasped, light blooming from their palms like wildfire. A soulmark bond being forged. No chains, no law, only will. Maelis gasped. And the vision shattered. She hit the ground hard, choking on cold air. Jude screamed. And then, footsteps. She tried to rise, but her limbs wouldn't obey. A shadow moved through the threshold of the altar hall. A voice, low and furious, echoed across the bone chamber. Who brought her here? Darian. He crossed the space like a storm. In 2 strides, he was at her side, his hands pressing to her shoulders. But when he touched her, the air sang. Silver light burst from their palms, his right, her left, meeting in the space between them in a web of glowing thread. A line, a link, a claim. The moonfire responded. Above them, the old carvings lit with silver veins. And from outside the chamber, wolves howled. Not 1. Not 10. The entire pack. A collective cry that echoed through Silverflame like a warning bell. Or a witness. Darian froze. So did she. For one suspended second, they stared at each other, alpha and girl, law and rebel, bond and blade. His breath fanned across her lips. Her fingers twitched where they brushed his. Then the light between their hands dimmed to a slow pulse. He scooped her into his arms without a word, lifting her effortlessly, and turned to leave. She was barely conscious as her head fell against his shoulder. But she heard the silence that followed them, the kind that came after a scream. The kind that came when something sacred had broken. They emerged from the tunnel into chaos. Elders lined the great stairs, flanked by guards with drawn blades and fear in their eyes. Eland was at the front, eyes wide with horror, flanking Elder Maeve, who clutched her ceremonial staff like a weapon. "Alpha," she hissed, "explain this." Darian didn't stop walking. She was in the labyrinth. Maeve's eyes narrowed to slits. "And you? You allowed a human girl to awaken the resonance?" "She didn't awaken it," he said quietly. "It responded." Gasps rippled through the elders. Maeve pointed her staff at Maelis. "That is forbidden. No soul mark may manifest without the Alpha's invocation. The law is clear." "I am the Alpha," Darian growled. Maelis stirred in his arms. Maeve's voice sharpened like ice. "You know the cost. A soul mark forged outside the rite is a fracture in the foundation of the pact. The resonance can tear through the bloodlines. We have records. You have fears," he snarled. "You do not command me. She threatens us. I will not debate this in the snow." Darian's eyes flashed. "Summon the council." He stepped past them all, carrying Maelis up the stairs. And no one dared follow. Maelis woke in a warm chamber with stone walls and wolf pelt blankets and firelight crawling along the ceiling. She sat up slowly, her head heavy, her chest sore. Jude was beside her, fast asleep in a chair, his hands clutching a wolf-tooth necklace, the one that had belonged to their mother. She reached out and brushed his hair back. Then the door opened. Darian stood there like a storm contained, hands at his sides, jaw clenched, eyes unreadable. "You triggered the resonance." She rose. "You dragged me out of the maze. You were collapsing. You touched me." The air crackled. "I had no choice," he said lowly. Maelis stepped forward. "Neither did I." Silence. "Do you fear me now?" she asked. No, his voice was quieter. "I fear what this means." She lifted her hand. The silver mark still glowed faintly beneath the skin of her palm. "So do I." The council was summoned by dusk. Maelis stood in the Hall of Verdicts, flanked by guards, her head unbowed. Darian stood at the opposite end of the chamber, silent. Eland paced like a chained wolf, jaw tight. Maeve's voice rang out. "Maelis Hart is accused of awakening a soul mark bond without Alpha right or council blessing. By Law 7 Alpha, this constitutes an unauthorized forging, punishable by exile or worse." Murmurs. Tension. Maelis lifted her chin. "I didn't choose this," she said clearly. "But I don't regret it." Arrogance, Maeve spat. "You think you can twist tradition?" "No," she said, voice steady. "I think your tradition is already broken." The council erupted. But Darian didn't speak. Not yet. He only stared at the mark on her palm, as if it were a weapon. Or a door. Chapter 10. Burn the contract. The snow whispered like silk across the threshold of the Alpha's chamber as the heavy doors groaned open. Maelis stepped through, her chin lifted, shoulders squared despite the ache threading through her limbs. The firelight bathed the carved stone walls in amber and gold, but none of it reached the man standing by the high windows, back rigid, face shadowed. Darian Vale didn't turn. She could feel him, though. That slow burning presence that curled beneath her skin like wildfire held in check. "Close the door," he said, voice cold as mountain wind. She did. Only then did he turn to face her. The silver sigil on his palm, the same one that now marked her own, glimmered faintly between his fingers, half faded and angry. His storm-gray eyes were unreadable, carved from stone and storm clouds, but she could sense the fracture beneath. "You disobeyed my law," he said quietly. Maelis lifted her chin. "I followed my brother. You triggered the resonance. I didn't ask for it." His hand clenched at his side. "Do not lie to me." Her laugh was soft, bitter. "And if I did? What then? Will you exile me, Alpha?" He stalked toward her, steps slow, measured, each one coiled with tension. "You knew what that altar was. You felt what it could do." "I felt him. Screaming." Darian stopped a breath away. "And you thought risking the entire bloodline was worth it?" Maelis met his gaze, her own filled with heat not from the hearth. "I think your precious bloodline is already rotting from the inside." He flinched. She stepped closer, voice like frost and flame. "You're not angry because I disobeyed. You're angry because you couldn't stop it. Because something happened that you didn't control." His breath caught. For a moment, the air between them crackled, silver-threaded and trembling. Then Darian looked away. You think this is about me? I've seen what uncontrolled soul marks can do. They infect, unravel. They don't just take you, Maelis. They take everyone. And yet you're still breathing, she whispered, so maybe the world didn't end. He turned back, eyes burning. You're playing with fire you don't understand. No, she said. I understand perfectly. I just refuse to be burned by it. And then, with deliberate grace, she reached into her coat. She withdrew a scroll, bound in gray ribbon. The contract. The one that sealed her fate to his, the Alpha's political mate, the human bride offered as a symbol of peace and subjugation. Maelis stared at it for a moment, fingers trembling. Then she ripped it in half. The parchment screamed as it tore. Darian went rigid. She threw the pieces to the fire. I won't be your symbol anymore. Or your bargaining chip. You would break your oath? I never made it freely. You'll be cast out. Then let me go. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched as the fire consumed the pieces of the contract, slow, bright, final. Maelis turned. Walked to the door. Paused. I'll leave at first light. With or without your blessing. And then she was gone. The hallway outside the Alpha's chamber was quiet, too quiet. But when she turned the corner into the east wing, she found him. Jude. Kneeling by her door. His small frame was curled around a worn wolfskin bundle, fingers clutching the old tooth necklace their mother had worn until the day she died. His eyes were red, and the moment he saw her, they filled again. Don't go, he whispered. Her breath caught. She crouched in front of him. Jude. I heard them. The elders. They said if you leave, the bond will fester. That the mark might make you sick. Or worse. She took his hands. That's not your fault. I don't want you to die, he sobbed. Maelis folded him into her arms. She stayed there for a long time, cradling his trembling shoulders, her face buried in his snow-damp hair. She couldn't go. Not tonight. Not yet. The moon rose blood-pale over the white-bone peaks. In the great hall, Darian sat alone, the hearth crackling low behind him. Before him, on the stone floor, lay the last scrap of parchment that hadn't turned to ash, a fragment of the contract, half burned, the ink barely legible. He didn't touch it. Didn't look away. Around him, the wolves of Silverflame howled into the darkness. A storm was rising beyond the peaks. But his voice was quieter than the wind as he whispered to the empty room. If you weren't my mate, I would let this curse take me whole. And still, the sigil on his palm pulsed. Not dead. Not yet. Just waiting. Chapter 11, The Exile's Bargain. The moon rose sharp and full above the jagged cliffs of the eastern gorge, casting long silver blades across the stone. Wind howled through the skeletal pines clinging to the edge of the Floatstone ravine, a place so treacherous the wolves of Silverflame dared not linger. Vale stood alone on the cliff path, her cloak trailing like ink behind her. The chill stung her cheeks, but she did not flinch. Darkness suited her. Silence had always been her armor. And tonight, betrayal would be her blade. A rustle stirred the trees behind her. Brave of you to come alone, came a voice, low and threaded with amusement. Or foolish. Hard to tell with Vale blood. She turned slowly. Karen Thorne stepped from the shadows, golden hair glowing like a wildfire halo beneath the moon. He was taller than she remembered. Broader, too. The scar along his jaw caught the light like a blade's edge. And that smile, lazy, sharp, dangerous, had not dulled with time. Foolish would have been trusting you, she said, voice smooth as velvet and just as dark. Karen chuckled. And yet here you are. I didn't come for pleasantries. No, I imagine you came for something colder. Sharper. He stepped closer, boots crunching against frost-hardened ground. Power, perhaps? Kasira's eyes narrowed. You said you had a plan. I do. He stopped a breath away, gaze sweeping over her with calculated ease. One that ends with your brother on his knees, the elders scattered like ash, and you no longer whispering orders in the shadow of a man who never saw you. Kasira flinched. Karen's smirk deepened. So he still treats you like a ghost chained to the past. She said nothing. Let me guess, he continued, circling her like a wolf scenting blood. He gives his orders through Elend now. Maelis has his attention, and you, loyal Cassira, are left holding the leash no one asked you to pull. Get to the point, she snapped. Karen stopped behind her. Help me destabilize the Elder Council the night before the eclipse. Distract their seers, poison their vote. I'll deal with Darian. And in return? He stepped beside her, voice soft. You'll stand at my side when I reclaim the hold. Not as a forgotten sister, but as the blade that carved the new throne. Cassira's throat tightened. Why now? She asked. Why not storm the walls with your exiles like every fool before you? Karen's eyes gleamed. Because you're not a fool. And I don't need a storm. He reached into his coat and pulled out a scroll, wrapped in red twine, sealed with the ancient sigil of the Woolshade Temple. I have something better. Cassira took the scroll, fingers brushing his. The mark beneath her palm pulsed once. A faint shimmer, barely visible. Blood promise magic. Rare. Forbidden. This is an oath older than your soul mark laws, he said. Bind your name to mine under moonlight, and the wolves will feel the shift. We won't need a civil war. Just a spark. The gorge fell silent. Even the wind held its breath. Cassira unrolled the scroll. Her name carved beside his in archaic runes. One drop of blood would seal it. Power. At last. She bit the tip of her thumb and pressed it to the parchment. The scroll hissed softly. Karen did the same, pressing his blood over hers. The ink shimmered silver, then vanished. It was done. He stepped forward, his voice low and reverent. From this moment, you are no longer the sister of the Alpha. He took her hand, turned it palm up. And what am I? She asked, despite herself. Karen bent, pressed his lips to her blood-marked skin. The blade of the next king, he whispered. The one no wolf will dare forget. Cassira stared at him. And for the first time in years, felt seen. Felt feared. Felt free. High above, hidden in the ravine's frost-shadowed ledge, Elend Corvin crouched behind a wall of stone, watching. He couldn't hear their words, but he didn't need to. He saw the blood. Saw the scroll. Saw Karen's mouth on her palm. His gut twisted. But there was no proof. No solid thread to follow. Not yet. Silently, Elend slipped away into the snow, footsteps vanishing behind him. Chapter 12, The Silent Bond. The wind outside Silverflame hold whispered of snow. Inside, the world had narrowed to the fevered gasps of a child. Maelis sat by Jude's bedside, one hand curled around a damp cloth, the other pressed gently to his too warm forehead. His silver-flecked lashes fluttered, lashes so long they almost touched his cheeks, just like their mother's had. Shoo, she murmured. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. The fire in the hearth crackled low, throwing long shadows across the chamber walls. It was nearly midnight, the hour when the stone corridors grew silent and frost crept across the panes like veins of ancient magic. She wasn't supposed to be here. She'd slipped past guards and locked doors with nothing but a lantern and the will to stay by her brother's side. He whimpered again, sweat glistening along his brow. The fever had hit hard that morning, turning his voice to a whisper, his body to a flame. A knock would have warned her. But the door opened without sound. Maelis didn't hear him enter, but she felt him, like a ripple in the air, a pressure on her lungs. Darian Vale stood at the threshold, broad shoulders blocking the moonlight pouring through the hallway window behind him. His storm-gray eyes locked onto her. For a long moment, neither spoke. He stepped forward, quiet as shadow, gaze dropping to Jude. His jaw clenched. You weren't summoned, he said, voice low, clipped. I wasn't waiting for permission, Maelis replied, wringing out the cloth and smoothing it once more across Jude's forehead. He's burning up and none of your healers know what to do. Because this isn't a sickness that touches flesh, Darian said. The spirit inside him is waking. Maelis turned sharply, lips trembling. You speak of it like it's a curse. In Silverflame it is. Her fingers curled into fists. Then I thank the stars we're not all born of Silverflame. Darian didn't move. Maelis stood slowly, facing him. The firelight danced across her ash-blonde curls, casting her in hues of gold and fury. You think if you keep locking the world behind cold walls and colder laws, none of it will reach you. But he's 10, Darian. 10. And he's burning with something you won't even name. I know what it is, he ground out. That's why I fear it. No, her voice was quiet now, trembling but sharp. You don't fear it. You fear me. His brow furrowed. You fear not being able to control this. Me. Him. Whatever the moon decided we are to you. A silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bow. Then, without a word, Darian unfastened the heavy cloak from his shoulders and draped it around hers. The fur-lined velvet settled over her like a memory, too soft, too warm, too wrong. I don't fear you, he said finally, storm-gray eyes flickering like something had cracked behind them. I fear what I'd become if I didn't. She stared at him, pulse hammering in her ears. Then, Maelis. Jude stirred beneath the blankets, his voice barely audible. Both of them turned at once. The boy's eyes were still closed, face flushed with heat. But his lips moved, whispering through the haze of fever and dream. She's your moon. Darian's breath caught. Maelis froze. The words hung in the air like prophecy, like fire waiting for wind. Darian took a step back, eyes wide, not in fear, but in something far more dangerous. Recognition. He turned and walked out. Didn't slam the door. Didn't speak. Just disappeared into the stone corridor like a shadow chased by dawn. Maelis remained by Jude's side, hand trembling against his cheek. Her heart was thunder and ice, her soul pulled taut between ache and something worse, hope. Outside the chamber, in the hallway where moonlight spilled like silver tears onto ancient stone, Darian leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. And for the first time in years, he let them fall. Chapter 13. Blood Between Stone. The snow grew thicker with every step, clinging to Maelis's boots like the weight of choices not yet made. They had left Silverflame before dawn, long before the torches were lit in the hold's main corridor, long before anyone could stop them. Eland said nothing for most of the ascent, but his presence beside her was steady, a silent promise carved into the wind. The path curved up into the white bone mountains like a scar, leading toward the forgotten temple known only in whispers, Stonehall Vale, the place where the wolf gods had once walked, before their names were buried by fear. The air was thinner here, sharper. Every breath was an ache. The sky overhead was a bruised silver, swirling with storm clouds, and the cliffs rose on either side like jaws waiting to close. At last, the ridge opened and Maelis gasped. There, perched atop a jagged plateau, was the Stonehall Shrine, the old name carved still into its bones. Crumbling pillars rimmed the high altar, each etched with ancient glyphs that shimmered faintly beneath the snow. Wolves of stone flanked the path, their faces worn by time, their eyes hollow with memory. And waiting beside the altar, like she'd never left, stood old Mother Isra. She was smaller than Maelis expected. Bent beneath layers of faded wolf pelts, her hair a wild storm of gray and black, one eye milky with age, the other burning bright as frost fire. You brought her, Isra croaked, her voice like gravel ground beneath ice. The girl of ash and moonlight. Eland stepped forward. He's dying. The boy, Jude, something in him's waking. We need. I know what you need, Isra said. I saw it before his first cry was drawn. She shuffled forward until she stood before Maelis. Then, with surprising speed, she raised a trembling, claw-like hand and pressed it to Maelis's chest. You carry the wound and the flame. The one who remembers. The one who chooses. Maelis shivered. What do I need to do? Isra turned, motioning to the stone altar. To awaken what lies dormant in the boy, you must complete the Moon Eater's trial. The soul must face what it fears, or else it will shatter under divine weight. Eland paled. No one's passed the trial in centuries. Because no one was meant to survive it, Isra rasped. But I have to try, Maelis said, stepping forward, breath catching in her throat. He's all I have. Isra nodded once, and the wind howled in answer. She took Maelis's hand and guided her to the altar. It was cold stone, cracked and ringed with frost. A hollow had been carved in the center, a place to rest a head, a heart or a memory. Lie down, the seer whispered. Maelis obeyed. Isra's fingers smeared ash and blood along her brow, lips muttering a tongue older than the moon. When the vision comes, you will not be able to run. You must choose to stay. Choose to see. Maelis nodded, and then darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was standing in a forest of bone. White trees twisted like spines overhead, and the snow beneath her feet glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. This is not real, she told herself. But it felt real. She took a step, and the scene shifted. She was no longer alone. A cottage rose before her, crooked and warm with golden light. Her feet moved without thought, drawing her closer, closer, until the door opened. And her mother stood there, alive, whole, smiling. "Come in, sweetheart," her mother said, voice exactly as she remembered, soft as chamomile, warm as firelight. "It's cold." Maelis's chest cracked. She stepped inside. The hearth burned bright, and Jude, young, unburdened, giggling, chased a wooden wolf through the room. Their mother turned, lifting a bowl of soup from the fire. But then, a growl. Low, deep, wrong. Maelis spun. From the window, darkness spilled like ink. Red eyes blinked in the black. Then teeth. Wolves. The kind that didn't speak. That didn't remember their names. "Run," her mother screamed, shoving Jude into her arms. The door shattered inward. And time collapsed. Maelis held her mother's hand as blood bloomed beneath her ribs. Held it even as the warmth left her fingers. Held it even as the darkness claimed everything. But when her eyes opened again, she was kneeling beside her mother's body. And for the first time, she did not scream. She whispered, "I forgive you." The forest shook. Light poured from her chest, blinding and silver bright. The memory dissolved. Maelis gasped awake on the altar, sweat-soaked and shivering. Isra stood over her, eyes gleaming. "You chose to see." Maelis sat up, breath catching in her throat. "And now," Isra said, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder, "you may choose to save him." Far below, in Silverflame hold, Jude's heart beat steady for the first time in days. And Darian Vale, miles away, looked to the north without knowing why, only that the world had just shifted. And nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 14. The day the flame went out. The wind was howling by the time Darian Vale reached the moonfire altar. It shouldn't have been. Not on a day like this, clear, sunless, the kind of cold that settled in the marrow and refused to leave. But the wind screamed as if mourning, as if it knew before the rest of them did. Beneath the bone-carved archway, the sacred flame flickered. The moonfire had burned for over 100 generations, an unbroken column of silver-white heat that curled endlessly upward into the sky, never touched by snow, never dimmed by time. Until now. It sputtered like a dying breath. Darian didn't move. He stood at the edge of the altar stones, his hands clenched behind his back, storm-gray eyes locked on the trembling fire as though by sheer will alone he could reignite it. A tremor passed through the earth. And the flame went out. A gasp tore through the crowd. From the carved balconies above the altar, the elders rose to their feet as one. Fur-lined cloaks rustled like wings preparing for war. At the center of them, Elder Maeve stepped forward. Her eyes were ice, her voice sharp as the mountains themselves. "The bond is broken." Murmurs spread through the gathering like wildfire across frost. Whispers of omen, of curse, of prophecy awoken too soon. Darian didn't flinch. But a vein bulged at his temple. Elder Maeve raised her staff. "The sacred flame, which binds the strength of the Alpha line to the soul of the pack, has extinguished. This cannot happen without interference, without tampering, without bloodline violation." She turned, sharp and slow, to face Darian. "You have allowed a human girl to awaken powers that were forbidden. You have sheltered a boy whose blood calls to the old gods. You have tampered with the order of all things Alpha Vale." Darian's voice, when it came, was a low growl wrapped in silk. "The boy is no threat. He is the end of the pact." The elders hissed their agreement. Darian looked up to the stone ledge where Jude Hart stood, surrounded by 2 cloaked guards. The boy's silver-flecked eyes were wide, trembling, but bright. as if something ancient shimmered just beneath the surface of his skin. Maelis wasn't with him. Darian's jaw locked. Where is she? Then, from the back of the crowd, a traveler in a weather-stained cloak leaned against a stone pillar, head tilted as though only mildly intrigued by the proceedings. He wore no insignia, carried no scent that marked him as pact. But his smile, half-curled and cruel, lingered too long on Jude. Karen Thorne. Darian's wolf surged to the edge of his skin. Karen hadn't stepped foot in the hold in 10 years, not since his father's rebellion drowned in blood. And yet here he was, like a shadow cast backward in time, watching the chaos he'd long predicted bloom around his rival. And no one knew. I propose, Elder Maeve called above the noise, that Alpha Darian Vale be removed from power until an inquiry can determine the extent of his violations. He has lost the flame. He has lost the trust of the ancestors. Gasps. Then silence. All eyes turned to Darian. He could feel it, the collective tension in the air, the pact's scent tinged with confusion, fear. He breathed once. Just once. I have not lost the flame, he said, each word like a carved blade. It has not gone out. It has been transferred. To what? Maeve snarled. He didn't answer. Instead, his gaze lifted once more to Jude. The boy was staring straight at him now. His lips moved, but there was no sound. His eyes glowed faintly silver. And Darian felt it. The pulse. Like a second heartbeat beneath his own. A bond forming where no bond should exist. The crowd stirred. Some stepped back. Others began to chant under their breath, warding charms, ancestral prayers. Suddenly, Jude cried out, clutching his chest. His knees buckled. The guards leapt to catch him, but not before a ripple of silver flame pulsed outward from his body, washing over the altar stones like moonlight turned molten. The flame reignited. Not white. Not gold. But silver. Cold and wild. And all the old laws burned with it. Get him away from the altar, someone screamed. The guards obeyed. They dragged Jude down the steps. The boy's eyes fluttered, caught between waking and something else entirely. He was whispering words no child should know. Names too old to be spoken. Darian stepped forward, instinct roaring in his blood. But the elders blocked his path. No farther, Alpha, Maeve said coldly. You've done enough. Darian growled. Bones cracked in his hand. He didn't change, wouldn't allow the wolf to claim him fully here, but the tension in him snapped like cords. His fingers burst open from the inside, blood streaking down his knuckles. Gasps echoed again. He looked down. His own body was betraying him. Not from weakness, but from rage. His hand curled into a fist, dripping red onto the snow. I will not be questioned by those who tremble at the first sign of change, he said, voice a razor. But even as he spoke, he knew. The tide had turned. Not because of the elders. Not even because of Karen's hidden poison. But because the world itself had shifted. And Maelis wasn't here to see it. As Jude disappeared behind stone doors and the altar burned anew with silver fire, Darian Vale stood alone before his people, his control cracked, his legacy in question. And high above, cloaked in shadows, Karen smiled. The first thread had unraveled. And soon, the rest would follow. Chapter 15, No One's Luna. They tried to keep her out. The stone doors of the Silverflame Council Hall loomed like the gates of a frozen tomb, guarded by 2 sentries whose faces were unreadable beneath their helmed shadows. But Maelis did not waver. Snow clung to her boots. Her ash-blonde curls were half wet from the river crossing, dried only by the fury that pulsed like fire beneath her ribs. I was summoned, she said, voice steady, though her heart beat like war drums in her ears. And I will be heard. One of the guards hesitated. The other stepped aside. As she passed beneath the archway, the echo of her footsteps bounced off polished obsidian floors. Moonlight streamed down from the stained glass dome above, casting a fractured glow across the council's raised semicircle. They were already seated. 7 elders, flanked by silver-robed advisors. At the center of them sat Elder Maeve, her white braids coiled tight, her eyes sharp enough to flay. And beside her, rising like a raven from a perch carved of bone, stood Cassira Vale. Maelis's breath stilled. Darian was not in the room. Of course not. Not since the altar had flamed silver. Not since Jude had been dragged away like a vessel cursed. Cassira's amber eyes found hers and narrowed, lips curling in that knowing way Maelis had come to dread. Maelis Hart, elder Maeve intoned, voice hollow with ritual. You stand before this council not as an accused, but as a clarifier of bonds. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Cassira spoke next, her tones silk-wrapped steel. In light of the Moonfire shift and the unprecedented response from the Alpha's bloodline, we require clarity on your place in the Order. Maelis stepped forward. Her hands were raw from the journey. Her voice was not. There is a bond, she said plainly. Gasps scattered through the crowd. I have felt it since the mountain's breath first called to me. Since the moment Darian Vale touched my wrist, and I did not flinch. Cassira's nostrils flared. Then you admit it. You've accepted the Alpha's mark. No, Maelis raised her chin. I acknowledge the resonance. But I am no one's Luna. The air turned brittle. Even the shadows seemed to retreat. Elder Maeve's fingers tightened around the staff she held. The laws are clear. Resonance without claiming is forbidden. Unsealed bonds invite madness. I'm already mad, Maelis said, soft as snow. Mad enough to come here without a title. Mad enough to speak without permission. And then, before anyone could stop her, she drew a blade. Small, bone-handled, etched with the sigils of the old gods. She lifted her hand, turned her palm outward, and cut. Blood welled red against her pale skin. Crimson dripped to the marble floor, pooling like a vow. Gasps turned to chaos. I bleed not as Luna, Maelis declared, her voice rising with every word. I bleed as one who chose to stand. I am not claimed. I am not marked. I do not wear his name. I do not belong in any Alpha's bed or beneath any sacred vow. She turned slowly, letting them all see her face. I am the winter howl, she whispered. I am the daughter of no flame, no throne. And then, louder, as if her bones had cracked open to let the truth scream free. I am my own moon. Silence. Shocked. Reverent. Terrified. Cassira broke it with a shriek. This is heresy. You admit to touching our Alpha with your soul, and now you seek to stand above our laws? This girl has defiled the rites. She has broken none, a voice interrupted. All heads turned. Eland Corvin stood just beyond the pillars, cloak soaked through, jaw set in quiet defiance. She has broken no right that has not already been abused by this council for generations. Cassira's fury twisted to venom. You speak out of turn, Beta. I speak because no one else will. Eland stepped fully into the light, his green eyes meeting Maelis's for a fraction too long. He turned back to the circle of elders. Your laws were built for wolves who never questioned. She is the question. She is the danger. Cassira snapped. She is the future, Eland said calmly. And you fear her because she reminds you of the gods you buried. A long pause followed. Then Elder Maeve's staff struck the stone. Enough. She looked between Maelis and Eland with a gaze that stripped flesh from bone. This matter will be recorded. We shall review the implications of her defiance. Not defiance, Maelis whispered. Reclamation. And she turned without waiting for dismissal. As she strode from the chamber, her blood still warm across her palm, her heartbeat echoed with a strange new rhythm. Not his. Not theirs. Her own. Chapter 16, The Night They Howled Back. The air inside the council hall was too thin to breathe. Darian Vale stood in the center of the crescent chamber, the silver flames of the moonfire torches flickering behind him like ghosts. Around him, the council sat with their hands folded, their eyes sharp as blades. The sigil of Silverflame glinted above them, carved into the black stone wall like a brand no one dared question. Elder Maeve rose slowly, her voice clear, cold, and final. By the vote of the Elder Circle, under the authority of the Ancestral Pact, and in light of your failure to contain spiritual instability within your line, Darian Vale, you are hereby stripped of the Alpha mantle of Silverflame hold. No gasp followed. The silence was too complete, too prepared. Only the clink of Darian's armor rang out as his shoulders tensed. Cassira Vale stepped forward like a shadow cast by fire, lips parted in a smile that did not reach her eyes. I will assume provisional leadership until the bloodline can be purified and stabilized. The clear blood reformation begins tonight. Clear blood. A term not heard in a generation. And one that should have stayed buried. Maelis pushed past the guards at the chamber's edge, her voice sharp as a cracking whip. You don't get to rewrite legacy into purity because it suits your ambition. All heads turned. Her face was pale from the night before. Her palms still wrapped in linen. But her eyes burned with the clarity of fire against snow. Kasira's gaze darkened. You are not permitted to speak in this chamber. You are no Luna, no council member. You are a... I am a witness, Maelis cut in. And I watched you orchestrate this. I heard the lie in your tongue when you spoke of cleansing blood. This isn't about balance. It's about power. Darian took a step forward, voice dangerously low. Enough, Maelis. But she didn't stop. If you silence every voice that isn't tied to your throne, what will be left of the wolves you claim to lead? Elder Maeve's staff struck the floor. This human agitates rebellion. She speaks the truth, Elin said from the far side of the chamber. And if that's treason, then write my name beneath hers. Kasira's jaw clenched. Guards. Detain them both. Steel unsheathed in the shadows. Elin did not move. Touch her, he warned, and I will show you what an Omega used to be. You just became one, Maeve said flatly. Effective immediately, Beta Eland Corvin is stripped of title and rank. You are now Omega of the lowest standing. The room spun, or maybe it was Maelis's blood pressure shifting with her rage. She reached for Eland's arm, but two guards were already there. Don't, she said. Don't touch him. Darian didn't move. Didn't speak. He simply watched. And it was that stillness, that silence, that shattered her. She allowed the guards to take her arms. Let them drag her through the moonlit halls like a criminal. Somewhere behind her, she heard Eland's voice as he was pulled down another corridor, unresisting. The prison at the base of Silverflame Hold was cut into the mountain's root. Cold seeped into the stones. There was no torchlight, only the glow of the veins of quartz running through the walls, pale as dead moons. They threw her into a cell without ceremony. When the door slammed shut, she slid to the ground, trembling not from fear, but fury. She pressed her wounded palm to the floor, whispered a prayer she didn't know she believed in, and waited. The moon rose high over the white-bone peaks. It was a full moon, pale and swollen, haloed by ice clouds. The howl began softly. One voice uncertain. A young wolf, perhaps, who had not yet learned to curb instinct for fear. Then another joined. Then 3. Then 5. Then dozens. The sound rose and crested like a tidal wave breaking over the cliffs. A call not to war, but to recognition. To truth. And beneath the mountain, in her cell of stone and silence, Maelis felt it before she heard it. Her bones thrummed. Her chest lifted as if someone had poured lightning down her spine. Then, the howl reached her ears. Low and pure. Hundreds of voices harmonizing in defiance. Not for a Luna. Not for an Alpha. For something older. For something truer. She staggered to her feet, eyes wide. Grasped the bars with blood-stained fingers and pressed her forehead to the cold metal. Footsteps echoed beyond the tunnel, then pause. Dozens of them. Not guards. Not elders. Young wolves. They padded down the passageway, their fur slick with moonlight, eyes glowing silver white. No one had sent them. She stepped back as they gathered outside her cell, silent. One pup, barely shifted, tilted his head at her, then placed his paw on the stone and whimpered softly. Maelis knelt. Her tears burned before they fell. They're not mine, she whispered. They're not my wolves. She looked up at the moonlight slanting through the ceiling grate, catching her wrist, where the shadow of a crescent mark pulsed faintly under her skin. They're the moon's. They're hers. She closed her eyes. And smiled. Chapter 17, The Betrayer's Feast. Snow fell soft as ashes, cloaking Silverflame Hold in a hush too perfect to trust. Inside the great hall, no hush remained. Flames leapt from iron sconces carved in the shape of wolves' jaws, casting long shadows on the marble floors. Where once hung the banners of the Alpha bloodline, now draped a hybrid sigil, half the Silverflame wolf, half the thorned serpent of the southern exiles. A feast had been laid. Roasted elk, honey-glazed roots, blood wine steeped with hawthorn and yarrow. But no one touched the food. They watched the dais. They watched her. Kasira Vale, draped in onyx velvet that shimmered like wet obsidian, stood before the council as if she had been born for thrones and flame. "Tonight," she said, lifting her goblet, "the bloodlines converge." Beside her stood Karen Thorne, gold-haired, grinning like he'd already won. "Our ancestors fractured over fear and false purity," Kasira continued. "But Silverflame cannot survive with its heart divided. We need new breath, new blood, a new era." Karen raised his goblet in echo. To the red oath. A few of the elders echoed the toast. Most didn't. In the back of the hall, Darian Vale stood unarmed, flanked by two soldiers no longer sworn to him. His eyes, like a thunderstorm held barely in check, never left his sister. Kasira met his gaze, then lifted her chin and spoke louder. "Darian Vale is hereby banished to the edges of the northern wilds. His alpha bond is severed by decree of the council." Not a murmur. Not a protest. Just silence. The kind that sounded like betrayal. And then came the final blow. "Let it be known," Kasira said, turning to face the gathered crowd, "that as of tonight, the Soulmark law is under revision. Mate bonds shall no longer govern rank or ritual. The Soulstone Grove will be removed. The Moonfire Path will be destroyed," Karen interrupted smoothly. "To clear the old trails for what must rise in their place." Darian stepped forward, fury crackled beneath every step. "You would burn the very thing that made us more than beasts." Kasira didn't look at him. "It made you weak. It made us loyal." Karen chuckled, and Darian turned to him, voice low and venom slick. "You never cared for loyalty. Only legacy. Legacy is the only thing that outlasts blood." Karen's voice was a blade in velvet. "And your blood has run cold." Darian moved as if to speak again, but the guards shifted. He did not give them the satisfaction of dragging him away. He turned, the silver lining of his cloak catching firelight one last time, and left the hall where he was born to rule. Left it to his sister, who had once wept beneath his shadow. The feast began, but no one truly ate. The wine flowed, but no one truly drank. Kasira sat at the high table, her crown lightless, her posture perfect. She held her goblet in gloved fingers, watching the fire across the room instead of the man beside her. Karen leaned closer. "Beautiful," he murmured, his voice low enough only she could hear. "All this, beautiful. You wore ambition like a gown and wore it well." Kasira didn't look at him. He tipped his goblet toward hers. "To the Queen of Wolves." She clinked her glass to his with only the edge of her rim. Then he leaned in further, his breath a ghost against her ear. "You'll have the power, Kasira," he whispered. "Every law, every throne. But the soul she gave him? That, I'm afraid, you'll never hold." The wine in her mouth turned bitter. Her hand trembled. The goblet slipped from her grip and fell, shattering on the stone like prophecy made real. Red splashed across the hem of her gown. The crowd turned. But no one moved. No one dared ask why the would-be queen suddenly looked like a woman who'd traded too much and gained nothing that could warm her. Karen simply raised his goblet again and drank deep. And smiled. At the edge of Silverflame, beyond the stone walls and blood-streaked banners, smoke began to rise. From the Soulstone Grove. The grove where generations had etched their marks, prayed beneath the moon, and bared their spirits to bond. Karen's men, rogue wolves in red leathers and ash-smeared armor, dragged sacred markers from the snow. One by one, they smashed them. One by one, they lit them. The flames crackled in protest, as if the stones themselves refused to burn. But in the end, they turned to ash like all else. The path of fate began to fade. And in the frost-bound valleys below, where the wind howled with voices not quite mortal, something stirred. A warning. Or perhaps, a promise. Chapter 18, The Alpha Beneath the Snow. The snow had teeth that night. It bit at Maelis's ankles as she staggered through the pines, each breath a gasp of frost, her hands raw and shaking. Her blood had long stopped warming her. Her will alone drove her legs forward. She should have died in the prison cell. But she hadn't. The wolves had come. Young ones, barely shifted, barely trained, yet their eyes had burned silver and wild, answering a call that hadn't come from her lips, but from something deeper. Ancient. A howl threaded through her soul, a rhythm etched in the marrow of her bones. They hadn't spoken. They had only bowed. And then they ran, with her between them. Now, beneath the pale moon and the crushing quiet of the white-bone foothills, Maelis ran still. Until... Maelis. The voice was thin and high and human. Her knees gave out from relief. She collapsed to them just as Jude tumbled into her arms. He was crying, his arms wrapping tight around her ribs, small frame trembling. "You came back," he whispered. "You found me," she breathed into his shoulder. "You clever little thing." "I followed the howl," he said. "It was yours. I heard you, even in the dark." Behind him, a shape moved from the shadow of the pines. Old Mother Isra. The seer's blind eye glinted with frost. "Come, girl," she rasped. "You're not done yet. There's still one flame in need of kindling." They traveled by moonlight, always downhill, always north. The wolves flanked them in silence. A dozen younglings with fangs barely grown, but hearts already sworn. Isra walked slow, leaning on her carved staff, but her gaze never left the horizon. At last, the trees parted. Maelis froze. Below them yawned a hollow in the mountainside. A glacial basin cradled in jagged stone, its snow oddly untouched, too pristine, too silent. Isra called it the Valley of Wolf Souls. "The place where moon first touched flesh," she murmured. "Where the first alpha knelt and rose again, burning." The wolves did not follow them into the basin. Only Jude did, hand clutched to Maelis's coat. At the center, half buried in snow and blood, lay a body. Broad-shouldered. Unmoving. Maelis collapsed beside him, snow soaking her knees. "Darian." No answer. She touched his face. Skin like ice. Lips blue. He'd been here days. Left to die. A silver gash crossed his chest. Another down his ribs. He'd fought hard before they dragged him here. Fought to his last breath. Jude wept silently beside her, his hand trembling. "Do something," he whispered. Isra stepped beside them and held out a knife. "You carry the winter howl," she said. "Your blood is old. Chosen." Maelis didn't hesitate. She slit her palm. "Let the blood run." Then she pressed it into Darian's frozen hand. "Not for me," she whispered. "For you. For everything they took from him. For everything he'd still yet to claim." Her blood seeped into his palm. The ground trembled. Jude gasped. Light flared, silver and blue and blinding. And from Darian's chest, a low, ragged breath escaped. Then another. He arched, bones cracking, body seizing. And from the air above him, a howl erupted. Not his voice, but something older, deeper, his wolf, rising from slumber. White fire licked through his veins, lighting them beneath his skin. He shifted. Not like before. Not the half-form. Not the battle-tamed guise. This was his true shape. Silverflame reborn. The alpha beneath the snow. He rose, a great white wolf cloaked in embers, eyes like store fire, breath steaming with the heat of rebirth. The young wolves at the ridge fell to their knees. Jude clutched Maelis's sleeve, whispering, "He's beautiful." But Maelis stood slowly, the wind tugging her curls around her cheeks, tears cutting warm paths down her frozen skin. She stepped forward and placed a hand on the beast's chest. His breath hitched. He leaned into her touch. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. "Don't fight for me." Then louder. Clearer. "Fight for you." Darian threw back his head. And howled. The sky answered. The snow lifted from the earth as if in prayer. Across the ridge, the wolves howled back. The war had begun again. But this time, the flame burned for truth. Chapter 19, The Fall of Hollow Court. The sky bled fire over the Whitebone Range. From the eastern ridge, where dawn's light painted ash and ember into the snow, the wolves came. First one. Then many. A tide of fur and fang. Their paws left no prints in the frost, as if they belonged to the storm itself. At their head ran him, a beast crowned in white flame. Darian Vale. His silver-marked wolf form cut through the silence like a blade. The wind curled around his massive frame, eyes gleaming storm gray even through the mist. The snow hissed where his breath touched. Behind him, the boy warriors of Silverflame thundered across the ridge, young, half-trained, but burning with belief. The hollow court was waking to its end. Inside the stone-hewn council chamber, candlelight danced across polished bone columns. Incense choked the air. Karen Thorne stood at the center of the hollowed dais, arms raised, a new crown of obsidian thorns poised above his golden hair. He smiled. By blood and moon, he intoned, voice ringing off stone, I claim the old throne. I restore the fire my father was denied. Kasira Vale stood at his side, draped in jet velvet, lips a taut line. Her hands trembled once and then stilled. She had made her choice. The elders, those who'd sold soul and creed for survival, watched with hollow eyes. Every mouth chanted allegiance. Every word echoed in falsity. And then, the door shattered inward. A wall of wind and snow burst through, extinguishing the torches. And with it came the howl. Low, thunderous, alive with rage. The kind of sound that remembered blood. That remembered betrayal. The court froze. Karen's smile faltered. Darian leapt onto the dais, landing with a crack of claws on stone. The wolf burned white. Impossible, one elder croaked. Eland Corvin moved before anyone else could. He'd stood still long enough. With 2 swift steps, he was behind Elder Brecht. One clean motion, blade to throat, and the traitor crumpled without a sound. The room erupted. Kasira turned just in time to see Eland drive his dagger into the heart of the second traitor. You never ruled me, he snarled. I followed him. Darian shifted mid-stride, white fur fading to skin as he landed before Karen in full alpha form, taller, broader, fire gleaming in his eyes. Karen lunged, claws bared. They clashed. It was not a fight of finesse. It was elemental. Alpha against exile. Ice against fire. Blood against blood. The younger wolves poured into the chamber, joining the skirmish. The air turned to chaos, snarls and metal, cries and snow. But amidst it all, 2 figures moved apart. Maelis found Kasira in the circle of broken stone columns. For a long moment, neither spoke. You should have stayed a servant, Kasira said coldly. You were better on your knees. Maelis didn't flinch. And you should have looked past mirrors before ruling others. Kasira shifted first. Dark velvet split as her wolf form surged, sleek, shadowed, quick as venom. Maelis didn't shift. But around her, the air shimmered. Pale light pulsed along her skin like veins of moonlight. A phantom of a white wolf, translucent and vast, unfurled behind her like wings. The room fell away. They circled, spirit against shadow. Kasira struck, fast, fierce, but Maelis met her, bare hands glowing with silver heat, dodging each slash, each lunge. She was not stronger. But she saw through Kasira's rage. Saw the wound beneath the pride. I know what it's like, Maelis whispered, catching her wrist mid-strike, to be the one left outside the circle. Kasira's wolf blinked. Maelis swept her leg, knocking her down. And held her there. But she did not strike the final blow. She knelt instead, her mouth near Kasira's trembling ear, and said only, You are not my enemy. You're my mirror beneath the moon. Kasira froze. Then slowly, like thaw cracking in spring, her wolf began to shrink. Shift back. A woman once more. A woman weeping. She reached into her cloak with shaking hands. And pulled free her power sigil, the burnished seal that gave her voice weight in the Elder Council. Without a word, she placed it on the ground. And crushed it beneath her heel. Then she turned and walked away through the fallen snow. On the dais, Darian stood above Karen, breathing hard, blood staining his jaw. The exile lay broken beneath him, the fire in his eyes extinguished. Around them, the hall fell to silence. One by one, the wolves lowered their heads. And in the center of it all, Maelis stepped beside Darian. She took his hand, unashamed of the blood, unafraid of the stares. Together, they turned toward the rising light outside. The hollow court had fallen, but something far greater was just beginning. Chapter 20, Bound by Moon and Fire. The wind was breathless on the peak of the White Bone Mountains. Above the world, where the air was thin and laced with silence, the snow no longer howled, it waited. The stars blinked like ancient eyes, and the moon hung full and bone-pale, suspended directly over the jagged altar that crowned the mountain's spine. Silverflame had gathered. Wolves lined the icy cliffs and ridges, rows upon rows of furred forms and cloaked warriors. Some wore their wounds like sigils. Others stood with trembling limbs, too young to remember a time before the curse, too old to believe it could be undone. But they were here for this. The rebirth. At the heart of the sacred circle carved into the stone, where frostbitten runes pulsed with sleeping fire, stood Darian Vale. He was not the same Alpha who had once walked the halls of Hollow Court with shadows stitched to his back. Now he bore his fire openly. He stood bare-chested in the cold, silver ash smeared across his arms, his storm-gray eyes fixed on the moon with a stillness that trembled beneath the skin. His breath fogged the air, but no shiver touched him. Beside him, Maelis stepped forward. Her ash-blonde curls were tangled by wind, her skin pale as the snow beneath her feet. But her spine was straight, her chin lifted. There was a ferocity in her presence now, tempered not by anger, but by clarity, by choice. She looked not at the crowd, but at him. Darian's gaze shifted. The crowd faded. The stars could collapse, and he would not blink. "You came of your own will," he said softly, his voice more tremor than thunder. Even after everything, Maelis met him without flinching. "I'm not bound to you." A pause. "Not by fate," she said. "Not by curse. Not even by fire." Her eyes shimmered. "I chose this." And then she stepped into the circle of souls. The wolves stirred, a ripple of breath and muscle. Even the wind bowed to the moment. Old Mother Isra approached from the shadows, her wolf pelts trailing along the ice like old memories. She held in her gnarled hands a basin carved from moonstone, filled with water from the sacred melt of the first spring. She said nothing at first, only looked between them with her ruined eye, as if weighing centuries. Then she spoke, voice cracked and ancient. "Let the fire that cursed you now burn anew. Let it not chain, but cleanse. Let the bond be sealed not by law, but by resonance." She nodded to Maelis. Without hesitation, Maelis pricked her palm and let a single drop of blood fall into the basin. It hissed on contact, curling silver like smoke across water. Darian followed. His blood met hers in the same pool, storm meeting snow. The water glowed. Around them, the runes of the soul ring lit with silver-blue fire. The wolves stepped back instinctively, eyes wide. A phantom howl rose from the basin, not from any throat, but from memory. From magic. Then Maelis took Darian's hand. Flesh to flesh. Mark to mark. And with the mountain wind catching her voice, she said, "I do not belong to you." He looked down at her, and for once, the storm inside him softened. "I know," he murmured. She smiled, tears slipping past her lashes. "But I'll walk beside you." He bowed his head. "Always." Their lips met, slow, reverent, not like a claim, but a confirmation. The flame did not bind them. The moon did not command them. They chose each other anyway. And the mountain felt it. From the peak downward, snow began to melt. Not in floods, not in destruction. But an inch. Just an inch. Enough for stone to breathe. For frozen roots to shift. Enough to say, "The curse has broken." A cry rose from the cliff below. "Jude." The boy stepped forward, his silver-flecked eyes brighter than the moon above. In his hands, he held a ring, bone-white, ancient, carved from the spine of a god long cursed. The soul mark ring. Once placed on the fingers of forced mates. Once burned into the skin. Now he held it like a relic. Without hesitation, Jude turned to the moonwell, an ancient basin carved into the edge of the mountain, where moonlight pooled without end, and threw the ring into its heart. The bone hissed, cracked, and shattered. The wind didn't howl. It sighed. All around them, wolves dropped to their knees. Some wept. Some howled in chorus. Some simply stared at the snow beneath their feet, watching it melt 1 inch deep. Freedom, for the first time in generations. Old Mother Isra turned to the crowd. "Let witness be made," she said, her voice rising with strength. "Let all who walk in fur or flesh remember, the soulmark law is no more." Darian stepped forward then, his arm around Maelis, his eyes sweeping the sea of kin below. "Silverflame," he called, his voice carried by the very bones of the mountain, "will no longer choose its rulers by bloodline. No more birthrights. No more curses." A pause. "From this day forward, we choose by resonance. By the strength of soul, not name." Maelis watched him, quiet and still. And for the first time, he did not feel burdened by the crown the mountain placed upon him. He felt worthy of it. As the fires flickered in the ruins behind them and the old moon glowed bright, Darian Vale and Maelis Hart stood not as fated lovers, not as cursed souls, but as two who had bled for this choice. And the mountain sang their names. Chapter 21: Ashes of the Crown. The war ended not with thunder, but with the quiet rearranging of breath. The fires in the hollow court had long since been put out. Soot clung to stone like memory, and broken banners fluttered from their torn seams, reminders of how high and how foolishly the old blood once flew. Where once judgment was passed with iron tongues and cold decree, now only whispers remained. And in that hush, Silverflame began to rebuild. The wolves emerged from their wounds slower than they had from battle. Victory, it turned out, had teeth of its own. And when the howling had faded, it was not a crown that waited on the mount, but silence. And choice. The new council met beneath open sky, their voices echoing through the uncarved stones of a chamber not yet built. No thrones. No pillars. Only ash. And Maelis stood among them. She wore no furs. No jewels wound her throat. No Luna pendant hung from her collarbone. Just wind in her hair, and a steady calm carved deep into her bones. The same steadiness she had clung to when dragging her brother across snowbanks. The same resolve that had bled from her hands when she stitched wounds on wolves who once would have called her lesser. Now they called her leader. But she didn't want it. When the call rose, Luna Maelis, claimed of the flame, breaker of the mark, she raised her hand once, firm and gentle. "I do not wish to be named." A silence fell like snow. Darian, standing beside her, did not speak. He knew. She met the eyes of every elder, every blooded warrior and ash-marked youth in the circle. "I didn't fight to rule," she said softly. "I fought to choose." Eland tilted his head. "Then what would you ask instead?" Her voice did not tremble. "Let me build a school. A place not of rank, but of resonance. A hall where young wolves learn their strength is not in bloodline, but in bond. Call it what you will, the echo chamber, the resonance hall. Let me teach them that the fire they carry doesn't have to burn them from the inside out." A murmur moved through the crowd, shock, then something like understanding. Something new. Darian's gaze never left her. And when he spoke, it was only this. "Granted." And just like that, Maelis stepped back from the title the mountain tried to place upon her shoulders. She would not be Luna. She would be voice. The crown that remained was his alone. But he'd never worn it for power. Only for the right to choose who stood beside him. Later that dusk, he went alone to the prison hollow beneath the crumbling western wing. It had been built long ago, sealed with runes that no longer glowed. Now the doors hung open like mouths too tired to speak. Kasaira waited inside. She sat on the edge of a stone bench, her hair unbound, spilling like ink over her shoulders. The dark velvet she always wore had been replaced with a simple gray tunic, the neckline torn where someone had once ripped a sigil free. Darian paused at the threshold. "I've come to release you." Her eyes flicked up, sharp amber dulled from sleeplessness, but no less piercing. "And if I walk free," she murmured, "do I vanish, or do I bleed for your new creed? You owe us nothing." "No," she said, standing. "I suppose I owe only myself now." He didn't stop her as she stepped past. Only handed her the sword. "Their father's." She stared at it a moment, fingers trailing the leather hilt, tracing memory. Then, without a word, She slung it over her shoulder. Maelis found her at the gates before sunrise. The frost clung to Kasira's boots, her breath visible in the amber light. She didn't flinch when Maelis approached. No guards. No audience. Just two women standing between what had been and what might be. Kasira smiled, small and tired, but real. "You win," she said. Maelis shook her head. "It wasn't a contest." "No," Kasira agreed, looking to the mountains beyond. "That's why you won." She handed Maelis something, a ring carved from bone, not cursed, but carved by hand. No magic. Just a circle of memory. Maelis blinked. "What's this?" "Something I never wore," Kasira said. "Because I was always too afraid of what I'd have to hold if I did." She turned to go, but paused. "You were never trying to be queen," she said quietly. Maelis lowered her gaze. "No." Kasira's voice trembled like wind over glass. "And I spent my whole life terrified of being overlooked, when all I ever wanted was to be seen." A silence passed between them. Then, just before the gates closed behind her, Kasira said, "See them, Maelis. The girls who come after us. The ones like me. Show them they don't have to fight to be noticed. Show them they're enough." Then she walked into the snow. And never looked back. That evening, Jude stood on the cliffs above the Silverflame well, a quill tucked behind one ear, a satchel of parchment clutched to his chest. He was 10. But his eyes had seen too much. Maelis joined him there, and sat beside him without a word. He leaned into her, small shoulder bumping hers. "Darian says I'm to be the future recorder," he said with a faint blush. "Like the old archivists. But without all the scary teeth and bad smells." She laughed. "You'll do better. I want to write it all down. Everything. Even the messy parts." "You should." He looked up at her. "Is it really over?" She paused. Then kissed his temple. "No. But it's beginning." Behind them, the fires of the new era crackled to life. Ash no longer marked defeat. It was soil, ready to be planted with something stronger than fear. Chapter 22. The Wolf That Remained. The snow melted slower now. Not from cold, but from quiet. It was the kind of thaw that came not with sun, but with stillness. A peace too tentative to be called freedom, too sacred to be called merely survival. Silverflame stood reborn. Not in fire, but in breath. And in that breath, Maelis asked for distance. "I want to try," she said, her voice low as they stood beside the silver-glassed well, steam curling from its still surface like the exhale of some ancient, dreaming god. Darian looked at her, that steady storm gray gaze unreadable. "Try what?" "Choice," she said. "Even here. Even now." She stepped closer, so the moo-mark between her ribs tingled faintly beneath the linen of her tunic. His nearness always did that. Her bond to him was no longer a curse. It no longer burned. But it hummed, like the memory of a song that had once brought her to her knees. "I don't want to be fused to you because the moon says so," she murmured. "I want to stay because I choose to, not because it's the only thing left." Darian's jaw flexed once. "And to test that, you'd leave me?" She shook her head. "Not leave. Just live. Separately. For a time. You and your mountain. Me and my valley. And each day, if it matters, we meet here. As two people. Not two halves of the same mark." A silence stretched between them. The wind danced through the trees like a whisper of the old wolves. But Darian only looked at her, unblinking. A slow, impossible heat settled in his eyes. Not anger. Not pain. Pride. "You want to be free inside the bond," he said at last. "Yes." His nod was barely there. "Then I will build you a house of your own." He chose the southern edge of the valley, where the wildflowers came first in spring and the deer wandered close without fear. Where the Whitebone Mountains still watched in the distance, but didn't cast shadows. The house rose from white stone, each block carved and set by his own hand. He didn't tell her that. He didn't need her to know. Maelis arrived one dawn, dust on her boots, curls half bound with string. She paused at the threshold, staring at the curved doorway, the open hearth, the round windows that caught the sunrise perfectly. "I thought it'd be more royal," she said. Darian raised a brow from where he leaned against the frame. "You're not a queen." No, she smiled faintly. But I'm still yours. And he didn't touch her. Didn't pull her close or press his mouth to her throat. He only nodded once. I'll see you at the well. The days began to pass like breath, measured, quiet, full of fire beneath the calm. Each morning, she lit her own fire. He did too, beneath the rock face behind the old moonfire altar, in a narrow cottage that had once been reserved for ceremonial solitude. They lived like that. Apart, but never distant. Every evening they met at the Silverflame well, where the steam rose higher now softer. She would sit on the low stones, and he would bring her pine-scented tea or listen while she recited poems Elder Maeve had made her memorize. They didn't speak of longing. Didn't act on the pulse of the bond unless they both chose to. Some days they kissed. Some days they didn't. But every day they returned. And in that ritual, something profound bloomed between them. Not obedience. Not burning. Only presence. It was the 7th frost since the war when the call came. Elder Maeve was gone. No cries. No ceremony. Only a folded piece of cloth left upon her chair in the echo chamber. No one saw her pass. No one found her body. Just the scent of old wool-bone oil and the faint echo of laughter in the rafters. When Maelis opened the letter, her fingers trembled. To the girl who never bowed. You are the only Luna I would have knelt for. Now teach them to kneel to nothing but truth. Maelis pressed the paper to her heart and said nothing for a long time. Then she walked out into the snow and let it fall into the silver well. The words sank silently. Darian was waiting across the stone ring. He'd seen the news in her face before she spoke it. She left, Maelis whispered. He nodded once. Like all the old wolves. Quietly. She believed in me. I know. She turned to him, fingers curling slightly in the air. Not reaching. Not begging. And still, he stepped forward. Only this time, he didn't kiss her mouth or cup her waist. He reached for her hand and laced their fingers together without pressure. You're not my Luna, he said softly. Not because I don't want you to be, but because you chose not to be. Her breath caught. Do you still want me? I want you even more, he said. Because you stand beside me when I can't demand it. That night, Darian sat alone beside the fire pit at the back of the mountain. The silver flames hissed gently as they kissed the stone, casting the edges of his body in flickering warmth. The wolves had always told him, to lead was to claim. To protect was to possess. But she had shattered that. And he, Alpha of Silverflame, had let her. His shadow stretched long behind him. A black wolf shape dancing in silence. He watched it for a long time, then whispered into the fire. She is the only thing I have never tried to control. The flame crackled once, then twice. And for the first time, he smiled. Not like a king, but like a man who had finally learned the difference between strength and surrender. Chapter 23, The Boy Who Carried Fire. The first time Jude's heart lit the silver flame without trembling, the snow around him melted in a perfect circle, 12 paces wide, warm as a mother's touch. He was 12 years old. The stone beneath his boots had never known softness. But now, in the shadow of the white-bone ridges, there stood a place where no frost dared linger, the Lumion Academy, the house of resonant flame. It had no gates. Only pillars carved with runes, spiraling skyward like fingers raised in question. Inside, there were no thrones, no portraits of past elders, no blood-bound banners flapping in the wind. There was only the hearth. And a boy with silver-flecked eyes who refused to forget. Jude had chosen the low valley at the forest's edge to build the school, far enough from the moonfire altar that no shadow of the old rites reached them. Eland Corvin stood beside him the day the first stones were laid, silent, tall, a silent sentinel made of patience and unspoken loyalty. They'll say you're too young, Eland murmured. Jude tilted his chin. They said Maelis was too fragile. The beta gave a faint huff of breath, something that, from him, counted as a smile. Then I'll be your sword while you burn. The academy filled slowly. First came the curious, children of former warriors, orphans with frostbite scars, quiet-eyed girls who'd watched their mothers break under soul-mark law. They gathered around Jude like moths. Not because he was loud or charismatic, but because he glowed. When he taught, his voice didn't rise. It trembled, like a wire stretched tight over silence. "This," he whispered one morning, tracing a chalk line across the stone slate, "is the binding rune of choice. Older than any mate bond. Older even than blood." A dark-haired boy raised his hand. "Is it stronger than the bond?" Jude paused, then pressed his palm flat over the rune. "It's not stronger," he said, "but it's freer." Eland trained the students in survival, sword form, wolf body breathing. But it was Jude who taught the unteachable: soul sight, moon memory, the weight of an unspoken promise. He burned too hot for a child. By the time the fire festival approached, they were calling him Little Luminary. He hated the title, but he wore it. For her. The day before the festival, Jude found himself in the archives beneath the academy, brushing soot from a crumbling scroll. The record was sealed with the mark of the Elder Council, the old one, from before Silverflame had burned and rebirthed itself in ash. He broke the seal. Inside, testimony. Blood logs. Names. And one truth that struck him like a dagger between his ribs. His mother hadn't been killed by wolves. Not wild ones. Not rogue. But soldiers. Karen's old rebels, clothed in wolfskin and illusion, sent to slaughter human settlers and frame the beast's blood. To build fear. To fan rebellion. To ensure the pack would turn against their own. He sat in silence. Breath cold. Hands bloodless. When he climbed the stairs again, snow was falling. But his flame had changed. The fire festival was held in the clearing where the last battle had ended. Where stones still bore the scorch marks of prophecy and betrayal. Where Darian Vale had fallen to his knees with Maelis's blood on his hands and chosen to live differently. Now, torches lined the edge of the ring. The crowd was larger than it had been in years: wolves, humans, mixed bloods, seers with burnt fingers, children with wild hair and too wide eyes. Jude stepped onto the stone platform alone. He wore simple wool. His voice was clear. "The story you were told," he began, "was not the truth." No one interrupted. "The woman who birthed me died in the snow, screaming, not because she was prey, but because someone wanted you to believe she was." Gasps. Murmurs. He held up one hand. "I know this may change how you see me. Or the wolves who guard your homes. Or the humans who walk your roads. But I'm not here to tell you what to believe." The silver flame beside him flickered, then flared, casting his shadow threefold across the crowd. "I'm here to tell you this: I do not hate wolves." Silence. "I have every reason to. But I don't. Because the fire in my blood doesn't belong to vengeance. It belongs to truth." He turned toward the eastern pillar, where Darian stood, cloaked in silence. To the west, Maelis. Pale curls tied back, eyes brimming but dry. And beside them, the future. Students and soldiers. Lovers and lone ones. "I am one of you," Jude said softly. "Not because I was born wolf. But because I chose to stay when I could have fled." His eyes scanned the crowd, and then he stepped back, whispering the last words not to them, but to the fire itself. "I carry her flame. But it no longer burns me." The silver flame pulsed once, then lifted skyward like a living spirit, leaping high into the air before bursting into a soft rain of glowing embers. Children reached to catch them. One landed on Jude's shoulder. And did not burn. After the ceremony, Eland found him sitting on the school steps, legs swinging off the edge like a boy half his age. "You did well," Eland said simply. "I didn't cry," Jude murmured. "You didn't have to." Jude looked down at his palms. "I think I've been waiting to hear someone say she didn't die for nothing." Eland crouched beside him, resting one calloused hand on the boy's shoulder. "She didn't. You're here. That's everything." Jude blinked once, then leaned his head lightly against Eland's arm. "I'm not tired." Eland didn't reply, but he stayed. And in the quiet night, with flames still flickering in the hills, the boy who once feared shadows finally closed his eyes and dreamed without fear. Chapter 24: When the Moon Was Ours. The ascent to the Soul Mount Peak was meant to be done alone. No light. No fire. No bloodline tethered at your side. Only silence and snow and the weight of your own name. Maelis Hart walked through the darkness like someone who had been born from it. Her boots cracked through old ice. Her breaths ghosted the air. Every step away from the village below felt like shedding a skin she'd never asked to wear. The wind didn't howl. It listened. And the mountain waited. She reached the ridge just after moonrise, when the stars had sharpened like knives and the sky held its breath. A single stone marker jutted from the white, leaning crooked beneath the ancient pine, the same pine her mother had spoken of in whispers, and her father had died beneath in silence. Soulprint rights are older than the mate law, old Mother Isra had told her once, long before the fire and frost. The moon chooses nothing. Only you do. Maelis knelt before the stone. No circle was drawn. No fire was lit. Only her hand, bare against snow, and her voice trembling into the wind. I am Maelis. No one's Luna. No one's claim. I came here without a bond. I will leave without a curse. Her breath caught. She closed her eyes. I will carry the fire of my own making. The words evaporated before they struck the earth, but something ancient stirred. The wind stilled. Then a faint silver gleam rose from her palm, threading across her skin like ink spilled in starlight, veins of light etching across her wrist, coiling around her fingers. Her soul mark. Not forged by matehood. Not carved by ritual. Drawn by her choice. And it glowed not with violet or red or gold, but a strange, shifting white like snow kissed by flame. She stood. No one clapped. No voices called her name. But she had never felt taller. The wind shifted behind her. She didn't need to turn. She knew. Darian Vale stood at the edge of the clearing, snow clinging to his shoulders like morning veils. His storm-gray eyes caught the faint silver radiance of her mark, but he said nothing. Maelis sat down beside the old stone. Quiet. Steady. Darian followed. Not a word passed between them as they watched the silver flame rise far below, tiny torches blinking in the valley, where the festival still burned for her brother's truth. But up here, they needed no words. His gloved hand brushed hers once. Then stilled. She didn't flinch. She turned her palm upward. And after all these months of war and silence and restraint, of blood vows and broken dreams and breathless glances, Darian Vale took her hand without ceremony. Without claim. Without law. Just choice. The wind curled around them like a blessing. The snow did not fall. Only the stars moved, slow and ancient, over the mountaintop. Far below, Jude Hart dipped a quill into ink. The last page of his journal trembled beneath his hand, still warm from the festival's fire. He had seen them, two silhouettes seated high above, framed by snow and night and something stronger than destiny. He wrote, "There is no fate that cannot be challenged, unless you choose it." He set the pen down. And in the hush of a new age, the boy who had once feared silence let it settle around him like peace. On the mountaintop, Darian exhaled, eyes still fixed on the flickering lights below. "She's not the Luna they expected," he murmured. Maelis smiled, lips pale from cold, heart ablaze with something wordless. "She's the one they'll follow anyway." Darian didn't reply, but his hand tightened gently around hers. And when the moon crested the highest ridge of Whitebone, catching on the silver in her mark and the fire tucked behind his eyes, their shadows merged into one, stretched long across the snow, neither alpha nor mate, neither cursed nor claimed. Only chosen. And at last, free.